She walked out of that meeting convinced she'd won. Victoria Hale didn't lose, not in business, not in life. But when that father's phone rang and he chose his dying daughter over a $1 million deal, something inside her cracked open. Now, 3 years later, she's standing in a modest kitchen making terrible pancakes with a little girl who calls her mom, and she can't remember why power ever mattered. This is the story of a woman who had everything except the one thing money couldn't buy. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Here's what happened. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Victoria Hale's corner office on the 43rd floor. But she didn't notice. She never noticed weather anymore. Weather was for people who had time to look up. Her assistant, Marcus, stood in the doorway with a tablet, his expression carefully neutral. "Your 3 o'clock is here." The education startup? Victoria didn't look up from her laptop. The one burning through their Series A? Bridge, yes. "Give me 2 minutes." Marcus hesitated. "They've been waiting for 20. "Then 2 more won't kill them." Victoria closed her laptop with a definitive click and finally looked at Marcus. "What's the founder's story? The real one, not the press release version." Marcus consulted his notes. Ethan Cole, 32. Former teacher, single father. Started EduBridge 4 years ago with his own savings. They've got 90 schools using their platform, mostly in underserved communities. Revenue's growing, but not fast enough to satisfy investors. Board wants them to pivot to private schools, higher income demographics. He's resisting. So he's principled. Victoria stood and smoothed her skirt. That's usually code for about to be bankrupt. The technology's solid, their learning outcomes are impressive. Outcomes don't pay bills, Marcus. She checked her reflection in the window, perfect as always. Slate gray suit, hair pulled back without a strand out of place, the subtle diamond earrings that said wealth without screaming it. Send them in. She expected the usual startup desperation, the forced confidence, the rehearsed pitch, the barely concealed panic behind the eyes. She'd seen it 1,000 times. Victoria had built her empire, Hale Tech Industries, by knowing exactly when someone needed her more than she needed them. The door opened. Ethan Cole walked in, and the first thing Victoria noticed was how tired he looked. Not in a sympathetic way, she didn't do sympathy, but in a factual way, like observing data. Dark circles under his eyes. Coffee stain on his shirt collar that he'd tried to scrub out but hadn't quite managed. His suit was off the rack, pressed but not tailored, and his shoes had been polished recently but were wearing thin at the heels. Behind him came a woman Victoria vaguely recognized, Sarah Chen, his co-founder and CTO. She, at least, looked put together. "Mr. Cole?" Victoria didn't offer her hand, just gestured to the conference table. "Ms. Chen, you have 30 minutes. "We appreciate you taking the time," Sarah began, but Ethan cut her off. "Let's not waste it with pleasantries, then." He met Victoria's eyes directly, no flinching. "You've read our materials. You know our numbers. I'm not here to convince you we're a good investment by traditional metrics, because we're not." Victoria raised an eyebrow. That was new. Ethan pulled out his laptop, but instead of opening a slick presentation, he just turned it around to show a spreadsheet. "We're losing money on every school we partner with. Our CAC is too high, our margins are too thin, and if we keep going this way, we'll be dead in 8 months. Sarah looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. "Fascinating pitch so far," Victoria said dryly. "Is there a part where you tell me why I shouldn't end this meeting right now?" "Because you're not stupid." Ethan leaned forward. "Every venture capitalist in this city has told us to pivot. Chase the private schools, the affluent suburbs, the parents who'll pay premium prices. Build the technology for the kids who already have every advantage, slap some AI buzzwords on it, and ride the hype cycle to an exit. Sound advice. It's coward's advice." His voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath. "EduBridge works. We've got data spanning 4 years and 90 schools showing we can close achievement gaps. Kids in failing districts are testing 2 grade levels higher after 1 year on our platform. We're fixing something that's actually broken." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Cole, I've been in tech for 12 years. I've heard every founder tell me they're changing the world. Usually right before they change their business model to whatever makes money. Then you've been talking to the wrong founders. Or you're about to become one of them." The silence stretched. Rain continued its assault on the windows. Somewhere 43 floors below, the city moved, people rushing, traffic snarling, lives happening that had nothing to do with this room. Sarah jumped in, her voice practiced and smooth. What Ethan means is that we believe there's a path to profitability that doesn't require abandoning our mission. We've identified 3 potential revenue streams that could... Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and something in his face changed. All the steel, all the conviction, gone. Just fear. "I'm sorry," he said, standing abruptly. "I have to take this." Victoria's voice could have cut glass. "Mr. Cole, you have 26 minutes left of your scheduled time. If you walk out that door..." But he was already answering, turning away. "Mia, baby, slow down. I can't..." His voice cracked. "What? Where's your inhaler?" Victoria watched as his whole body went rigid. "I'm coming, right now. Call 911 if it gets worse. I'm 10 minutes away." He was already moving toward the door, the meeting completely forgotten. "Stay on the phone with me. Try to breathe slowly, in through your nose. Yes, like that." "Mr. Cole?" Victoria stood. "If you leave this meeting..." He turned, and the look on his face stopped her cold. It wasn't anger or defiance. It was something simpler and more terrible. Complete indifference to anything she could do to him. "My daughter can't breathe," he said flatly. "So I'm leaving." And he did. Sarah stood frozen, her laptop still open to a slide deck Victoria would never see. "Ms. Hale, I'm so sorry. His daughter has asthma, and when she has an attack, get out. If we could reschedule, Ms. Chen." Victoria's voice was ice. "Your partner just walked out of a meeting with me. In 12 years, no one has done that. Not once. So you can either leave my office with whatever dignity you have left, or I can have security escort you. Your choice." Sarah left. Marcus appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later. He knew better than to ask what happened. "Your 4 o'clock is ready. Cancel it. Cancel everything else today." "Everything?" Victoria was staring at the door Ethan had walked through, her mind replaying that moment. The choice he'd made, instant, instinctive, without calculation. She'd spent her entire adult life making calculated decisions. Every meeting, every deal, every relationship weighed against potential returns. This man had a company dying, his entire life's work circling the drain, and he'd chosen his daughter without hesitation. "Ms. Hale?" She blinked. "What? Should I reschedule your afternoon?" "No, just give me the room." After Marcus left, Victoria stood at the window and watched the rain. Somewhere out there, Ethan Cole was probably in a hospital emergency room, holding his daughter's hand while machines beeped and strangers in scrubs monitored her breathing. He wasn't thinking about his company, or his pitch, or Victoria Hale. For the first time in years, she wondered what that felt like, to have something you'd drop everything for. Someone you'd choose over $1 million deal without a second thought. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother, the quarterly guilt trip disguised as concern. "Dinner this Sunday. Unless you're too busy again." Victoria deleted it without responding. She had a penthouse in Tribeca, 4,300 square feet of architectural magazine perfection. She had a house in the Hamptons she visited twice a year. She had an art collection worth 8 figures and a wine cellar she paid someone else to maintain because she didn't actually care about wine. She had everything. The office suddenly felt very large and very quiet. 3 days later, Victoria was in a board meeting when Marcus slipped her a note. "Idubridge filing for bankruptcy. Announcement expected, Friday." She should have felt vindicated. She'd called it. Another idealistic founder who couldn't make the hard choices, going down with his ship because he was too principled to abandon his mission. Instead, she felt irritated. After the meeting, she went back to her office and did something she rarely did, research that wasn't directly business-related. She pulled up Idubridge's platform, actually looked at the data. Ethan hadn't been lying. The learning outcomes were remarkable. Kids in schools that had been written off as failures were suddenly testing at grade level or above. Teachers in underserved districts finally had tools that worked, and it was all about to disappear because there was no profit margin in helping poor kids. Victoria closed her laptop and stared at nothing. Her phone rang. Her father. She almost didn't answer, but Richard Hale wasn't someone you ignored. Not when he'd handed you a tech company at 22 and watched you turn it into something that made his original vision look quaint. "Victoria, I hear you're looking at education technology now." News traveled fast in their world. Just due diligence, nothing serious. Good. Stay in enterprise. Education's a graveyard for capital. Her father's voice had the same clipped efficiency she'd inherited. How's the Redmond acquisition coming? They talked business for 10 minutes, the only thing they ever talked about. When he hung up, Victoria sat in the silence of her office and realized she couldn't remember the last time her father had asked how she was, not how the company was performing, or what deals she was closing, how she was. She couldn't remember because he never had. That night, she worked until 11, then took a car service home to her immaculate empty penthouse. The view of Manhattan was spectacular from the 48th floor. She poured herself a glass of wine she didn't want and stood at the window, looking at all those lit windows in all those buildings. Behind every one, there were people, families, arguments and laughter, and the mundane, beautiful chaos of lives being lived together. Victoria's reflection stared back at her from the dark glass. 30 years old, billionaire, CEO, alone. She drank the wine, hated it, and poured another glass anyway. The next morning, she made a decision that would have shocked her board, confused her competitors, and probably disappointed her father. She called Marcus. Get me the details on Edubridge's debt structure. Who holds the paper, what the terms are, what it would take to acquire the company outright. There was a pause. I thought we'd passed on them. We did. Now I'm unpassing. Ms. Hale, they're about to file for bankruptcy. If you wait 48 hours, you could pick up the assets for... I'm not buying their assets, Marcus. I'm buying the company, which means keeping it alive before it gets to bankruptcy court. Make it happen. She hung up before he could ask the obvious question. Why? Because she didn't have a good answer, or rather, she had an answer she didn't want to examine too closely. That moment when Ethan Cole had looked at her, really looked at her, and she'd seen that she didn't matter, not even a little. His daughter mattered, his mission mattered. Victoria Hale and all her money and power were completely irrelevant to what he cared about. When was the last time she'd been irrelevant? When was the last time she'd cared about something enough to walk away from opportunity? She didn't know, and that bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Marcus worked his usual magic. By noon, Victoria had a complete picture of Edubridge's finances, which were worse than she'd thought. By 5 p.m., she had a proposal drafted. By end of business, she'd had her lawyers contact Edubridge's lawyers. The acquisition offer was simple. Haletech would purchase Edubridge for enough to clear their debts and keep them operational in exchange for controlling interest. The current leadership would remain in place, with full autonomy over the educational mission. Haletech would handle fundraising, operations, and scaling. It was a good deal, too good. Her board would have questions. Sarah Chen called her directly at 7 p.m. Ms. Hale, I just heard about your offer. Is this real? My lawyers don't send fake term sheets. Why? Sarah's voice was suspicious. You made it pretty clear we'd burn that bridge. Consider it rebuilt. Do you accept or not? I need to talk to Ethan. Then talk to him. You have 24 hours. Victoria hung up. She went home, ordered food she didn't eat, and tried to work but couldn't focus. Instead, she found herself looking at Edubridge's website again, reading testimonials from teachers and parents. There was a video of a 9-year-old girl named Destiny explaining how the math program had helped her go from failing to the top of her class. The girl's smile was luminous. When was the last time Victoria had made someone smile like that? She closed the laptop and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. She kept thinking about Ethan's face when his phone rang. The instant transformation from founder to father. No hesitation, no calculation, just pure, instinctive love. Victoria's own parents had never looked at her that way. They'd been proud of her, certainly. Invested in her success, absolutely. But that raw, drop-everything love? She'd never inspired it. And honestly, she'd never felt it either. She'd built her whole life on control, on strategy, on keeping emotion out of decisions. And somehow that had led her to a 4,800-square-foot penthouse where the only voice she heard was her own. 22 hours later, Sarah Chen called back. We accept. Victoria had been in a meeting, but she stepped out. Put Ethan on the line. A pause, then a different voice. Tired, wary. Ms. Hale. Mr. Cole, your partner says you've accepted my offer. Yeah. He didn't sound happy about it. Though I've got to say I'm waiting for the catch. Nobody throws good money after bad unless they want something. I want your platform to survive. Why? It was a fair question. Victoria looked out her office window at the city below, all those people living their small, complicated lives. Because you were right, it works, and it would be a waste to let it die. That's it? Corporate social responsibility? Don't push your luck, Mr. Cole. I'm buying your company, not explaining myself to you. She heard something in the background, a child's voice calling, "Daddy!" Then Ethan, softer. "I'm on the phone, sweetie. 2 minutes." "How's your daughter?" The question came out before Victoria could stop it. The silence on the other end was heavy. "She's fine, thanks." "Good." Victoria cleared her throat. "My lawyers will be in touch about the paperwork. Plan on being operational again by end of month." "Ms. Hale?" Ethan's voice caught her before she could hang up. "I know I screwed up that meeting, and I know you didn't have to do this, so thank you." Victoria didn't know what to say to that. Gratitude made her uncomfortable. It implied debt, relationship, connection, things she generally avoided. "Just don't make me regret it," she said finally, and ended the call. The acquisition moved forward with the efficient ruthlessness that characterized all of Victoria's deals. Papers were signed, debts were cleared, press releases were issued. Hailtech's board grumbled but didn't revolt. Victoria had earned enough goodwill over the years to occasionally indulge in what they probably saw as charitable whimsy. Only Marcus seemed to understand it was something else. "You've been different," he said one evening as they were wrapping up work. "Different how?" "Distracted. You've checked the EduBridge metrics 8 times today." "It's a new acquisition. I always monitor closely in the first month." Marcus gave her a look that said he didn't believe that for a second, but he was smart enough not to push. "Their team is scheduled to present at the Monday meeting. Update on Q3 performance and expansion plans." "Fine. Put them down for 30 minutes." They requested an hour. Victoria almost said no automatically, then caught herself. "Give them 45. After Marcus left, she pulled up EduBridge's latest report. The numbers were starting to stabilize now that the debt pressure was gone. Schools were renewing their contracts. 3 new districts had signed on. Ethan Cole had sent her a personal note with the report, just 2 lines thanking her again and promising they wouldn't waste the second chance. His signature was at the bottom, next to a tiny doodle of what looked like a stick figure holding a balloon. Underneath, in smaller handwriting, "Mia says hi." Victoria stared at that doodle longer than she should have. Then she put the report away and went back to work on things that mattered. Deals. Numbers. Things she could control. Monday came, and with it the presentation. Victoria arrived at the conference room early, which was unlike her. She was usually precisely on time. Early suggested eagerness, and eagerness was weakness. Ethan and Sarah arrived exactly at 9. Ethan looked better than he had 3 weeks ago. The circles under his eyes were lighter. He'd gotten a haircut. The suit still wasn't tailored, but it was clean. "Ms. Hale." He nodded. Sarah had the laptop, already pulling up their presentation. "Let's see what you've got." They were good. Sarah handled the technical details with precision, walking through user metrics and engagement data. Ethan focused on impact, student outcomes, teacher testimonials, the qualitative stuff that usually made Victoria's eyes glaze over, but somehow didn't this time. Halfway through, Marcus brought in coffee. Ethan took his black. Sarah loaded hers with cream. Victoria noticed Ethan's hands were calloused, not something you usually saw in a CEO. Teacher hands, maybe, or father hands from doing repairs and carrying children. "We've had interest from 2 new states," Sarah was saying. "But scaling that fast would require significant infrastructure investment." "How much?" Victoria asked. They went through the numbers. It was doable. Barely. Victoria made notes, asked pointed questions, and watched Ethan's face as he defended his projections. He wasn't polished like most founders she dealt with. He stumbled over financial terminology, deferred to Sarah on the technical specs. But when he talked about the kids, about the teachers, about the mission, he was unshakable. "All right," Victoria said finally. "I'll approve the infrastructure spend, but I want weekly updates, not monthly. If this goes sideways, I need to know immediately." "Absolutely." Sarah started packing up her laptop. But Ethan just looked at Victoria with that same direct gaze from their first meeting. "Can I ask you something?" You have 2 minutes before my next meeting. Why did you really buy Edubridge? He leaned forward slightly. And don't give me the corporate line about strategic portfolio diversification. I read the press release. I want the real reason. Victoria should have shut him down, should have reminded him that she didn't owe him explanations, that their relationship was strictly business, that his job was to run the company she'd saved, not psychoanalyze her. Instead, she heard herself say, "You walked out of my office." Ethan blinked. "Yeah, my daughter was... I know why you left. That's not my point." Victoria set down her pen, met his eyes. "In 12 years of doing this, no one has ever walked out on me. Not once. Everyone else, they would have taken the call in the hallway, promised to come right back, tried to salvage the meeting. You didn't even hesitate." "I'm sorry if..." "Don't." She cut him off. "I'm not looking for an apology. I'm explaining. You made a choice that cost you everything or should have, and you made it instantly, without calculation. I wanted to understand that." The silence in the conference room was profound. Sarah had stopped packing and was staring at both of them. Ethan's expression softened slightly. "There was nothing to calculate. She's my daughter." "Yes." Victoria stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Turns out that's rarer than it should be." As they filed out, she heard Sarah whisper something to Ethan in the hallway. His response was too quiet to make out, but Victoria saw him glance back at the conference room, a question in his eyes. She turned away and pulled up her next meeting brief. But for the rest of the day, she couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had shifted. Some decision had been made, though she couldn't say what it was. That night, alone in her penthouse with its spectacular view and its profound silence, Victoria poured her wine and stood at the window and wondered what Ethan Cole's modest home looked like. Whether it was warm, whether anyone was waiting for him when he got there. Whether he ever stood at windows, drinking wine he didn't want, wondering if this was all there was. She doubted it. The realization that she envied him, envied a struggling single father in an off-the-rack suit who'd nearly lost everything, should have been absurd. Instead, it felt like the first honest thought she'd had in years. The acquisition became official on a Tuesday in late September, which meant Victoria had to attend a press conference she didn't want to attend and smile for photographers she didn't like. She stood at the podium in Hailtech's main conference hall, flanked by Ethan and Sarah, and delivered the statement her PR team had written about strategic expansion and commitment to educational equity. The reporters ate it up. They always did. Victoria Hale, the ice queen of tech, showing a softer side. One journalist even used the phrase "billionaire with a heart," which made Victoria want to leave the stage immediately. Ethan handled his part of the press conference better than she'd expected. He was nervous. She could see it in the way he gripped the podium, but he spoke honestly about Edubridge's mission without the usual startup hyperbole. No changing the world, no disrupting industries, just helping kids learn. Afterward, as they were being ushered out through a side exit to avoid the lingering press, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then looked at Victoria. "I need to make a call. 2 minutes." She nodded, and he stepped away. Sarah stayed with Victoria, making awkward small talk about the turnout until Ethan came back, his expression tight. "Problem?" Victoria asked. "Mia's school. She's fine," he added quickly, seeing Victoria's face. "But they need me to pick her up early. Something about a field trip permission slip I apparently didn't sign." Sarah jumped in. "I can handle the follow-up meetings. You should go." But Victoria surprised herself by saying, "I'll come with you." Both Ethan and Sarah stared at her. "You want to come to my daughter's elementary school?" Ethan said slowly, like he was testing whether he'd heard correctly. "I want to see your operation in context. You talk about serving underserved communities. I'd like to see one." It was a reasonable business justification, and they both knew it was complete nonsense. Ethan studied her face for a long moment. "Okay, but fair warning, it's not exactly the Upper East Side." "I've been to Brooklyn before, Mr. Cole. We live in Queens." Victoria's driver looked pained when she told him the address, but he didn't argue. They took her town car, Ethan in the back seat with Victoria, both of them not quite sure what to do with the silence. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said finally. "I know you're busy. I cleared my afternoon." "For a school pickup?" Victoria looked out the window at the city sliding past. "I've been to exactly one school in the last 10 years, and that was to give a commencement speech at Stanford. I talked for 20 minutes about innovation and resilience and didn't mean a word of it. Why'd you do it then? Because Stanford asked, and you don't say no to Stanford. She shifted to look at him. When's the last time you did something you didn't want to do because saying no would have been inconvenient? Ethan laughed, short and sharp. This morning, Mia wanted pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, and I can barely make regular pancakes. But you don't say no to a 7-year-old with big eyes. Did you manage the dinosaurs? They looked more like blobs with tails. She said they were perfect anyway. Victoria felt something strange in her chest. Not quite envy, not quite longing. Something more complicated. She sounds easy to please. She's 7. Everything's amazing when you're 7. Ethan's voice softened. Even terrible dinosaur pancakes from your exhausted dad. The car pulled up to PS 147, a squat brick building that had probably been new sometime around 1960 and hadn't been updated much since. Kids were streaming out the front entrance, a chaos of backpacks and shouting and parental pickups. Victoria stepped out of the town car, and several parents stopped mid-conversation to stare. She was wearing an Armani suit that cost more than some of their monthly rent, arriving in a vehicle that screamed money, and she knew exactly how she looked to them. Out of place. Intrusive. Other. Ethan didn't seem to notice or care. He waved to a couple of other parents, got a few waves back, and headed into the building. Victoria followed. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaner and something sweet, cookies maybe, from a classroom party. Construction paper artwork lined the walls, every surface covered in the gloriously messy creativity of elementary schoolers. Victoria found herself slowing down to look at a series of self-portraits, each one captioned with, "When I grow up, I want to be astronaut, doctor, teacher, pizza maker, dinosaur scientist." One girl had written happy and drawn herself with a huge smile and flowers everywhere. "Miss Hale?" She turned. Ethan was waiting by a door marked Main Office, his expression curious. "Sorry, I was just—" She gestured vaguely at the wall. "Yeah, they're pretty great, aren't they?" He held the office door open for her. Inside, a woman in her 50s sat behind a desk piled with papers and coffee cups. She looked up, saw Ethan, and smiled. "Mr. Cole, we called about Mia." "I know, Mrs. Patterson. I'm so sorry about the permission slip. I thought I'd signed everything, but it's fine. She's in the library with Ms. Chen." Mrs. Patterson's eyes slid to Victoria, taking in the expensive suit and the even more expensive watch. "And this is Victoria Hale," Ethan said before Victoria could introduce herself. We work together." Mrs. Patterson's eyes sharpened with recognition. "Oh, the woman who bought EduBridge. That's me." "Well," Mrs. Patterson stood up, suddenly formal. "We use your platform here. It's made a real difference for our students." Victoria wasn't sure what to say to that. She'd seen the data, the metrics, the reports, but hearing it from someone actually working in the trenches was different somehow. "I'm glad to hear it," she managed. Ethan was already heading toward the library. Victoria followed, feeling increasingly out of her depth. This wasn't her world. These fluorescent lights, these worn tile floors, these walls covered in the beautiful chaos of children learning and growing. The library was small but bright, with windows overlooking the playground. A young teacher sat at a table with a little girl, both of them bent over a book. The girl looked up when the door opened, and her face transformed. "Daddy!" She launched herself at Ethan, who caught her easily and swung her up. She was small for 7, Victoria thought. Delicate features, dark curls pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a t-shirt with a cartoon scientist on it. "Hey, baby girl, I hear you had some excitement today." "We were supposed to go to the Science Museum, but Mrs. Patterson said I couldn't go because of the paper." Mia's lower lip trembled. "All my friends went." "I know, I'm sorry, that's my fault. I should have checked my folder better. Can we go to the Science Museum anyway, just us?" Ethan glanced at the teacher, who'd stood up. "We can talk about it. First, say hi to Ms. Hale, she works with Daddy." Mia turned, noticed Victoria for the first time, and her eyes went wide. "Whoa, you're really fancy." Victoria found herself smiling despite herself. "Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet." Mia tilted her head, considering. "Do you like science?" Yes." I studied computer science in college. That's not real science, that's just computers. Mia said it with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old who'd already decided what counted as legitimate science. Real science is like animals and space and how things explode. Mia, Ethan said, a warning in his voice. But Victoria laughed. Actually laughed, surprising herself. You're right, computer science is mostly just math pretending to be interesting. Mia grinned. See, Daddy? She gets it. They left the school together, Mia holding Ethan's hand and chattering about the science museum and how unfair it was that she'd missed the field trip. Victoria's driver had pulled around waiting, and when Mia saw the town car, she gasped. Is that yours? It's the company's, Victoria said. Can we ride in it? Ethan started to object, but Victoria cut him off. Of course. Where are we going? Home, Ethan said firmly. You don't need to… The science museum, Victoria said, looking at Mia. Wasn't that the plan? Mia's eyes went huge. Really? Ms. Hale has work, Ethan said. At the same time, Victoria said, I cleared my afternoon. They looked at each other. Something passed between them. An acknowledgement, maybe, that this had stopped being about business the moment Victoria had gotten in that car. Fine, Ethan said finally, but only if you're sure. Victoria was already opening the car door. Get in before I change my mind. The Museum of Natural History was crowded with school groups and tourists, but Mia didn't seem to notice. She dragged them from exhibit to exhibit, asking questions faster than either adult could answer them. Why were dinosaurs so big? How did butterflies know where to migrate? What would happen if you put a human in space without a spacesuit? You'd die pretty quickly, Victoria said. At the same time, Ethan said, let's not think about that. Mia looked between them. Which answer is right? Both, Ethan said. Ms. Hale is being factual. I'm being a worried parent. They stopped at the planetarium show, sitting in the dark while a narrator explained the formation of galaxies. Mia sat between them, completely absorbed. At one point, when something particularly amazing appeared on the dome above them, she grabbed Victoria's hand without looking, squeezing tight. Victoria looked down at the small hand in hers, sticky from the juice box Ethan had bought her, warm and trusting and completely unselfconscious. When was the last time someone had held her hand? When was the last time she'd let them? She couldn't remember. After the museum, they got hot dogs from a cart outside because Mia insisted museum hot dogs were tradition. Victoria ate hers standing on a street corner in her $3,000 suit, mustard dripping onto her fingers, while Mia explained why she wanted to be a marine biologist when she grew up. Last week you wanted to be an astronaut, Ethan pointed out. I can be both. Ms. Hale, can you be both? I don't see why not, Victoria said, wiping mustard off with a napkin. The ocean and space are basically the same thing, huge, mostly unexplored, full of things that could kill you. Mia considered this seriously. That's a good point. Ethan was watching Victoria with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not suspicious exactly, more like he was trying to figure out a puzzle and the pieces didn't quite fit yet. By the time they got back to Queens, it was almost dinner time. Ethan lived in a small row house on a quiet street lined with trees that were just starting to turn gold. The house needed paint, and the front steps were slightly uneven, but there were flower boxes in the windows and a small yard where a basketball hoop stood slightly crooked. You want to come in? Ethan asked, and Victoria could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I was going to make dinner, nothing fancy, just… I'd like that, Victoria said, before she could talk herself out of it. The inside of the house was nothing like her penthouse. It was small and cluttered and lived in, with Mia's drawings on the fridge and shoes by the door, and a couch that had definitely seen better days. But it was warm. That was the word that kept coming to Victoria's mind. Warm. Mia immediately ran off to change out of her school clothes. Ethan led Victoria to the kitchen, which was barely big enough for both of them. Fair warning, he said, opening the fridge. I'm not much of a cook. You've probably got a private chef or something. I have several restaurants on speed dial and a very understanding delivery guy. Victoria leaned against the counter. What are we making? We? You offered me dinner. I'm helping. Ethan pulled out ingredients, chicken, vegetables, pasta. Okay, but if this goes badly, remember you volunteered. They worked side by side in the small kitchen, and Victoria found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did. Ethan moved efficiently despite his earlier disclaimer, clearly someone who'd learned to cook out of necessity rather than passion. He put her on vegetable duty, and they fell into an easy rhythm. "So," Ethan said, not looking at her while he seasoned the chicken, "want to tell me what today was really about?" "I told you. I wanted to see Victoria." He did look at her then, and the use of her first name stopped her. "You don't strike me as someone who spends her afternoon at elementary schools and science museums on a whim." She focused on chopping bell peppers, keeping her cuts precise and even. "Maybe I'm full of surprises." "Maybe. Or maybe you're trying to figure something out." "Like what?" "I don't know. That's why I'm asking." Victoria set down the knife. Through the doorway, she could see Mia in the living room, building something elaborate with blocks. The TV was on quietly in the background, some cartoon with bright colors and nonsense songs. "When I was Mia's age," Victoria said slowly, "my parents were building their company. I saw them maybe an hour a day, if that. Nannies raised me. Good ones, expensive ones, but still. And I turned out fine." "Did you?" She looked at him sharply. "Excuse me?" "I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm genuinely asking." Ethan turned off the stove, gave her his full attention. "You're incredibly successful. You've built an empire. But are you happy?" No one had asked her that in years, maybe ever. "Happiness is overrated," she said finally. "Success is measurable." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." She picked up the knife again, needing something to do with her hands. "Your daughter held my hand today, in the planetarium, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone did that, just held my hand because they wanted to." The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of Mia's cartoon and the distant noise of traffic outside. "My wife died when Mia was 3, Ethan said. "Cancer. It was fast, 6 months from diagnosis to gone, and for a while there I thought I was going to drown. Single dad, failing company, kid who kept asking why mommy wasn't coming home. He stirred the pasta, his movements mechanical. But Mia needed me, so I figured it out. And yeah, it's messy and hard, and I'm definitely screwing up half the time. But it's real. It matters." "I'm sorry," Victoria said quietly. "About your wife." "Thanks. It was 4 years ago. We're okay now. Different, but okay." He looked at her again. "You didn't have that, did you? Someone who needed you like that." "I had a company that needed me." "Not the same thing." "No," Victoria admitted. "It's not." Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Mia talked nonstop about her day, the museum, the planets, her friend Sophie, who apparently had a pet hamster named Dr. Whiskers. Ethan tried to get her to eat her vegetables with limited success. Victoria found herself laughing at Mia's running commentary on everything from the texture of broccoli to whether penguins would make good astronauts. After dinner, while Ethan was doing dishes, Mia dragged Victoria to the living room to show her the block tower she'd built. "It's a space station," Mia explained, "for the penguin astronauts. See, this is where they sleep, and this is where they do experiments on space fish." "Space fish?" "Obviously. What else would they experiment on?" Victoria sat on the floor in her expensive suit, helping Mia add to the space station, while Ethan watched from the kitchen doorway with that same puzzled expression from earlier. When it was time for Mia's bedtime, Victoria stood to leave, but Mia grabbed her hand again. "Can you stay for my bedtime story?" Ethan intervened. "Mia, Ms. Hale needs to go home. She's been here for hours." "It's fine," Victoria heard herself say. "One story." So she found herself sitting on the edge of Mia's bed, a small room painted soft blue, with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and books overflowing from a little shelf, while Ethan read from a book about a girl who befriended a dragon. Mia fell asleep before the story ended, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood sleep. Ethan marked their place in the book and stood quietly, motioning Victoria to follow him out. In the hallway, with Mia's door cracked open behind them, they stood in the semi-darkness, and neither of them seemed sure what to say. "Thank you," Ethan said finally, "for today. You didn't have to do any of that. I wanted to." The admission came easier than she'd expected. "She's wonderful, Ethan, your daughter." "Yeah, she is." He looked toward Mia's room, his expression soft. even when she's driving me crazy. I should go. It's late. Right, of course. But he didn't move, and neither did she. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. When you walked out of that meeting, when Mia called, did you even think about it, the choice? No, there was no choice. There was just her, needing me. That must be nice, knowing exactly what matters. Ethan studied her face in the dim light of the hallway. You could have that too, if you wanted it. I don't think I know how. Nobody knows how. You just do it anyway. Victoria's phone buzzed. Marcus, probably wondering where she'd disappeared to. The real world intruding on this strange, warm bubble she'd found herself in. I really should go, she said, but she didn't move. Victoria. Ethan took a half step closer. Why did you really come today? Because watching you choose your daughter over everything else was the most honest thing I'd seen in years, and I wanted to understand it. And do you? Understand it? She thought about Mia's hand in hers, the weight of it, the trust. She thought about this small, messy house that felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived. She thought about Ethan making terrible dinosaur pancakes because his daughter asked. I'm starting to, she said. The car ride back to Manhattan felt longer than the trip out had been. Victoria sat in the back seat, still smelling faintly of the vanilla soap from Mia's bathroom where she'd washed the museum and dinner off her hands, and tried to process what had just happened. She'd spent an afternoon at a children's museum. She'd eaten a hot dog on a street corner. She'd helped cook dinner in a kitchen barely bigger than her walk-in closet. She'd sat on a bedroom floor playing with blocks, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt that present. That engaged, that alive. Her penthouse felt even emptier than usual when she got home. She poured her ritual glass of wine, stood at her window with its perfect view of her perfect city, and for the first time in years, she let herself acknowledge what she'd been avoiding. She was lonely. Not alone. She'd been alone for years and told herself she preferred it. But lonely. Profoundly, achingly lonely in a way that success and money and power couldn't touch. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Thanks again for today. Mia can't stop talking about the fancy lady who knows about space and computers. You made her weak. Victoria stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. She made mine too. She deleted it before sending. Too honest, too vulnerable. Instead, happy to help. Let me know if she needs anything for school. His response came quickly. Will do. Have a good night. Victoria set her phone down and finished her wine and tried not to think about how Ethan's small, cluttered house had felt more like home than this place ever had. The next week, she found herself making excuses to visit Edubridge's offices, checking on the expansion plans, reviewing the new hires, sitting in on product meetings. All legitimate business reasons that didn't quite explain why she stayed longer than necessary or why she timed her visits to late afternoon when she knew Ethan would be leaving to pick up Mia. You're here again, Marcus observed on Thursday, his tone carefully neutral. We just completed a major acquisition. I like to stay hands-on during the integration phase. And the fact that you've never been this hands-on with any other acquisition is just coincidence. Victoria shot him a look. Do you have a point? No point, just an observation. He paused at her office door. For what it's worth, I've never seen you smile at your phone before. I don't smile at my phone. Marcus just raised an eyebrow and left. Victoria looked down at her phone where a message from Ethan was still pulled up, a photo Mia had drawn of the three of them at the museum, all stick figures with huge smiles. The one labeled Ms. Victoria was wearing a triangle dress and holding what was either a phone or possibly a very small dog. She was smiling at her phone. Damn it! The following week, Ethan invited her to Mia's school science fair. She told herself she was too busy. She had a board meeting, 2 acquisition calls, a dinner with investors she'd been trying to schedule for months. She rescheduled all of it and went to the science fair. Mia's project was about marine biology, specifically why octopuses were the coolest animals in the ocean. The poster board was covered in facts written in careful second-grade handwriting, with pictures Mia had drawn of octopuses doing various impressive things. They have 3 hearts, Mia explained to Victoria with great seriousness, and blue blood, and they can change colors and shapes. They're basically magic. Pretty impressive, Victoria agreed. Daddy helped me with the poster, but all the facts are ones I found myself. Mia pointed to each picture. Did you know they can fit through any space bigger than their beak? That's this hard part right here. The rest is squishy. Victoria found herself genuinely fascinated, asking questions about octopus intelligence and camouflage, while Ethan stood back and watched with that expression she was getting used to, part curiosity, part something else she couldn't quite name. When the judges came around, Mia presented her project with the confidence of someone who knew octopuses were objectively the best and was prepared to defend that position. She got an honorable mention, which she declared was pretty good for a second grader competing against third graders. After the fair, they went for ice cream. Another tradition, apparently. Victoria sat in a booth at a local shop that had definitely been there since the 70s, eating mint chocolate chip while Mia debated the merits of various ice cream flavors with the passion of a Supreme Court justice. Strawberry is good, but it's not great, Mia declared. Chocolate is great, but everyone picks it. Mint chocolate chip is great and interesting. Sound logic, Victoria said. What's your favorite? Mia asked. Victoria looked down at her cone. I don't think I've had ice cream in about 5 years. Both Ethan and Mia stared at her. 5 years? Mia's voice was scandalized. How are you even alive? Mia, Ethan said, but he was fighting a smile. I've been busy, Victoria said weakly. Too busy for ice cream? That's impossible. Mia shook her head sadly. You need to come with us more often. We get ice cream at least once a month. Victoria met Ethan's eyes across the table. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked serious, uncertain, like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't quite balance. Maybe I will, Victoria said. And just like that, it became routine. Tuesday afternoon, she'd leave the office early, something that shocked her entire staff into silence the first time it happened, and meet Ethan and Mia. Sometimes they went to parks, where Mia would play, and Victoria would sit on a bench with Ethan, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they grabbed dinner at small neighborhood places Victoria had never noticed, despite having lived in New York for a decade. Sometimes they just walked, Mia between them, holding both their hands. Victoria's board started noticing her absences. Her father called, his voice tight with concern that sounded more like disapproval. I hear you're spending a lot of time with the Edubridge acquisition, he said. It's a significant investment. I'm ensuring it's properly managed. Victoria, I know you. You don't do hand-holding. You do strategic oversight. A pause. Is there something you're not telling me? No. Because if there are problems with the acquisition, there are no problems. The company is performing well. Revenue is up. We're expanding into 3 new states. Then why the personal attention? Because I'm lonely. Because I spent 30 years building an empire and forgot to build a life. Because a 7-year-old girl held my hand and I realized I'd never felt that kind of uncomplicated affection before. Because I want to, Victoria said instead. Is that not allowed? Her father was quiet for a long moment. Just be careful. Don't let personal feelings cloud business judgment. After he hung up, Victoria sat in her office and tried to figure out when exactly this had stopped being about business. When had Tuesday afternoons with Ethan and Mia become the thing she looked forward to most? When had she started measuring her week by those few hours instead of by deals closed or revenue generated? She didn't have an answer, or maybe she did, and she wasn't ready to face it yet. Marcus knocked on her door, his expression carefully blank. Your 6 o'clock is here. The meeting about the potential merger with Cancel it. Cancel the meeting we've been trying to schedule for 2 months? Yes. Something came up. May I ask what? Victoria looked at her calendar. Tuesday, 4:30. Ethan would be picking up Mia in 20 minutes. They talked about maybe going to the park if the weather held. Something important, she said. She grabbed her coat and left before Marcus could argue, before she could talk herself out of it, before the responsible part of her brain, the part that had built an empire through calculated decisions and strategic thinking, could point out how insane this was. The park was mostly empty on a Tuesday evening in October. Mia was on the swings, pumping her legs to go higher, her laughter carrying across the playground. Ethan sat on a bench nearby, watching her with the perpetual slight anxiety of a single parent who'd learned the hard way that kids in emergency rooms had a statistical correlation. He saw Victoria approaching and his expression shifted into something complicated. Not quite a smile, not quite concern. Something in between. You came, he said. I said I would. You also said that about last Tuesday, and then your assistant called to cancel. Victoria sat next to him on the bench. I had a crisis with the Tokyo office. And today? Today I didn't. She watched Mia on the swings. I'm not very good at this. At what? This. Showing up. Being present. All of it. She turned to look at him. I spent 30 years optimizing my life for efficiency, and somewhere along the way I optimized out everything that actually matters. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. On the playground, Mia had abandoned the swings and was now climbing on the jungle gym with the fearless determination of youth. So why now? He asked finally. Why change? Because I saw you walk out of my office to save your daughter, and it made me realize I'd never had anything I'd walk out for. And then I met Mia, and she held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, and I realized how much I'd been missing. Victoria, I'm not finished. She took a breath. I know this is complicated. You have Mia to think about, and I'm your boss technically, and this whole thing probably violates several HR policies, but I can't keep pretending Tuesday afternoons are about business oversight. What are they about? She met his eyes. You. Both of you. This life you've built that's messy and real, and everything mine isn't. Ethan was quiet, his gaze intense. What exactly are you saying? I don't know. I've never done this before. I've had relationships, but they were always convenient, strategic. People who fit into my life without requiring me to change anything. She gestured toward Mia, who was now hanging upside down from the monkey bars. This isn't convenient. This requires me to change everything, and that terrifies me. It should terrify you. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Mia gets attached easily. She's already attached to you. If you're not sure about this, if there's any chance you're going to decide this doesn't fit into your 5-year plan, you need to tell me now. I don't have a 5-year plan anymore. I have Tuesday afternoons and the hope that you'll let me keep showing up for them. This isn't just about showing up, Ethan said, his voice intense. Mia already asks about you constantly. When are you coming over? Can we call Ms. Victoria? Will she be at my next school thing? If you're doing this, you're not just dating me, you're becoming part of her life. And if it doesn't work out, it'll hurt her, I know. It'll destroy her. She's already lost one mother. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She'd known about Ethan's wife, of course, but hearing it put that way, understanding what she was potentially stepping into, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I can't promise I won't screw this up, she said quietly. I probably will. I don't know how to be what you need, or what Mia needs, but I want to try, if you'll let me. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and Victoria felt more exposed than she'd ever felt in any boardroom or negotiation. This wasn't about money or power or strategy. This was about being human, being vulnerable, being willing to fail at something that actually mattered. Okay, he said finally. Okay, we'll try. But Victoria... He reached over and took her hand, the gesture simple but weighted with meaning. You have to actually try. Not fit us into your schedule when it's convenient. Not show up when you remember. Actually be here. I don't know if I know how to do that. Then learn, because that's what this is, showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Mia came running over, her face flushed from playing. Daddy, Ms. Victoria, watch this. She ran back to the jungle gym and proceeded to demonstrate a completely unremarkable but apparently very important climbing technique. They both applauded when she finished. Can Ms. Victoria come for dinner again? Mia asked, flopping down on the grass near the bench. Ethan looked at Victoria. Can you? She thought about her calendar, packed with meetings and calls and obligations. She thought about her empty penthouse and her ritual glass of wine and the view she'd stopped noticing years ago. Yes, she said. I can. Dinner that night was spaghetti that Mia helped make, which meant there was sauce on the counter and flowers somehow on the ceiling, and the whole kitchen looked like a disaster zone. Victoria found herself laughing, actually laughing, as Mia tried to twirl pasta on her fork and ended up flinging a noodle across the table. Oops, Mia said, not looking remotely sorry. That's 3 strikes, Ethan warned. 1 more, and you're cleaning the kitchen by yourself. Ms. Victoria will help me.
Right?
Victoria looked at the chaos surrounding them. The dirty pots, the splattered stove, the pile of dishes in the sink. In her penthouse, she had a housekeeper who came 3 times a week to maintain the pristine surfaces. She couldn't remember the last time she'd actually cleaned anything herself. Sure, she heard herself say. Why not? After dinner, they did clean the kitchen together, Mia standing on a stool to reach the sink while Victoria dried dishes and Ethan put away leftovers. It was domestic and mundane and somehow perfect in its imperfection. When Mia finally went to bed, after negotiating for 2 stories instead of 1, which she won, Ethan and Victoria sat on the couch with the kind of exhaustion that came from keeping up with a 7-year-old's energy. She likes you, Ethan said quietly. I like her too. No, I mean she really likes you. She asked me yesterday if you were going to be her new mom. Victoria's stomach dropped. What did you tell her? That you're my friend. That we're spending time together. That we'll see what happens. He turned to look at her. But she's not stupid. She knows what "we'll see what happens" means in adult speak. What does it mean? It means you're scared, but you're trying, which is fair. I'm scared too. Victoria studied his face in the dim light of the living room. Of what? Of screwing this up. Of letting Mia get hurt. Of wanting something so much that I'm willing to ignore all the red flags telling me it's a bad idea. What red flags? Ethan laughed, short and sharp. Victoria, you're a billionaire CEO. I'm a single dad barely keeping my company afloat even with your help. You live in a penthouse in Manhattan. I live in Queens in a house that needs a new roof. We exist in completely different worlds. So we bridge them. How? You think you're going to move to Queens, start doing school pickups and soccer practice? I don't know. Maybe. She shifted to face him fully. I know this doesn't make sense on paper. I know the rational thing would be to walk away before anyone gets more invested. But I've spent my entire life making rational decisions, and they've led me to a place where I'm successful and lonely and standing at windows wondering if this is all there is. So we're what? Your midlife crisis? That's not fair. Isn't it? Ethan stood up, started pacing. I need to know you're serious about this. Not just about me, but about what comes with me. The early mornings and the school events and the sick days. The fact that Mia has asthma, and sometimes she can't breathe and it's terrifying every single time. The reality that I can't just drop everything to fly to Paris for a weekend because I have a kid who needs stability. I know that. Do you? Because knowing it intellectually and living it are 2 different things. He stopped pacing, looked at her with an intensity that made her chest tight. I can't be your experiment, Victoria. Neither can Mia. The words hit harder than they should have. Maybe because there was truth in them. Maybe because Victoria had been treating this like a problem to solve, something she could approach with the same strategic thinking she applied to business. You're right, she said quietly. I've been selfish. I saw something I wanted and I went after it without fully considering the cost. That's not... I didn't mean... No, you're right. This is your life. Mia's life. And I've been treating it like something I can just slot into my schedule between board meetings. Victoria stood up, grabbed her coat. I should go. I need to think about whether I can actually do this. Victoria, wait. But she was already at the door, already running like she'd always run when things got too real, too complicated, too much. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Victoria's life, and that included building a company from the ground up and surviving her father's brutal mentorship. She threw herself into work, took meetings back to back, stayed at the office until midnight. She told herself she was being responsible, giving Ethan and Mia space, protecting them from her own uncertainty. Marcus saw through it immediately. You're avoiding them, he said one evening when he found her still at her desk at 9 p.m. I'm working. You're hiding. He set down a folder she hadn't asked for. For what it's worth, I've never seen you as happy as you've been the last few months. Happiness isn't the point. Then what is? Victoria didn't have an answer for that. She still got updates on EduBridge. The company was thriving, expanding faster than projected, attracting positive press for its mission-driven approach. Sarah sent weekly reports. Ethan didn't contact her at all, which was fine. That's what she'd wanted, space to think clearly, to make the rational decision. Except she couldn't stop thinking about Mia's laugh, or the way Ethan's house smelled like something baking on Sunday mornings, or how it felt to be part of something that mattered beyond quarterly earnings. 3 weeks after their argument, Victoria's father invited her to dinner at his club. She almost said no, but Richard Hale wasn't someone you refused without consequence. The club was all dark wood and leather chairs and old money pretending to be understated. Her father was already seated when she arrived, nursing a scotch and reading something on his tablet. "Victoria." He stood, kissed her cheek with the perfunctory affection of someone who'd never quite figured out how to be warm. "You look tired." "I've been busy." "So I hear. The board tells me you've been spending a lot of time on Edubridge." Victoria ordered wine she didn't want and tried to read her father's expression. "It's a significant investment. I want to ensure it succeeds." And does that require you to attend elementary school science fairs?" So he knew. Of course he knew. Richard Hale made it his business to know everything about his daughter's life, especially the parts that might be problematic. "I attended one event to support the company's mission." "Victoria." Her father set down his tablet, gave her the look that had terrified her as a child and intimidated her as an adult. "I'm going to be blunt. I've done some research on Ethan Cole. Single father, modest background, company that was failing before you rescued it, and now I hear rumors that you're personally involved." "Rumors from whom?" "Does it matter? What matters is whether they're true." Victoria met her father's eyes, saw the disapproval there, the calculation. This was a man who'd built an empire by making ruthless decisions and never looking back. He taught her to be the same. "They're true," she said. "I'm seeing him." Richard's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went cold. "That's a mistake." "Why? Because he doesn't come from money? Because he's not part of our world?" "Because he represents everything that will drag you down." Her father leaned forward. "You've worked too hard to build what you have. Do you really want to throw it away for some single father who needs you to keep his company alive?" "He doesn't need me. Edubridge is succeeding on its own merits. Because you're bankrolling it. The moment you pull back, it'll collapse." Richard signaled for another drink. "I've seen this before, Victoria. Successful people who get lonely, who start thinking they need something more meaningful than their work. It's a trap. You think this man and his daughter will fill some void, but all they'll do is hold you back." "You're wrong." Am I? Tell me honestly, have you been as focused on Hale Tech since you started this relationship? Have you closed any major deals, made any significant moves?" Victoria wanted to argue, but the truth was she hadn't. She'd been distracted, dividing her attention, letting Marcus handle things she normally would have managed herself. "That's what I thought," her father said, reading her silence correctly. "You're losing your edge, and in our world, that's fatal. Maybe I don't want to live in a world where caring about people is considered a weakness." "Then you're a fool." Richard's voice was sharp. "I raised you better than this. Your mother and I sacrificed our personal lives to build something that would last. We gave you every advantage, and you're going to throw it away for what? Domestic bliss in Queens? You didn't sacrifice your personal lives. You never had them in the first place." Victoria stood up, her wine untouched. "And that's not something to be proud of. It's something to be pitied." "Victoria, I spent 30 years becoming you, efficient, strategic, successful, and alone. And I'm done. I'd rather fail trying to be happy than succeed at being miserable." She left before he could respond, her hands shaking as she walked out of the club into the cold November air. Her driver was waiting, but she waved him off and started walking, needing to move, to think, to process what she'd just done. She'd never stood up to her father like that, never contradicted him so directly. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "Your father just called the office. Are you okay?" She didn't respond. Instead, she kept walking until she found herself in front of a familiar row house in Queens, lights on in the windows, a crooked basketball hoop in the yard. It was past 9. Mia would be in bed. Ethan might not even want to see her after 3 weeks of silence. Victoria stood on the sidewalk trying to decide if she had the courage to knock on that door. To choose this. To choose them. Before she could make up her mind, the door opened. Ethan stood there in sweatpants and an old t-shirt holding a garbage bag he'd apparently been about to take out. They stared at each other. Hi, Victoria said finally. Hi. Ethan set down the garbage bag. You've been avoiding me. I know. Want to tell me why you stopped avoiding me enough to show up at my house at 9:30 on a Wednesday? Victoria climbed the steps, stopped in front of him. She was still wearing her work clothes, the armor she put on every morning to face the world. But standing here, looking at Ethan in his worn t-shirt with garbage duty interrupted, she felt like all that armor was useless. I had dinner with my father tonight, she said. He told me I was making a mistake, that you and Mia would hold me back, ruin my focus, destroy everything I've built. Ethan's expression went carefully neutral. And you came here to tell me he's right? I came here to tell you he's wrong, and that I'm terrified he might be right anyway, and I don't care. She took a breath. You asked me 3 weeks ago if I was serious about this, if I could actually show up, be present, be part of your lives. And I ran because I wasn't sure I could. But I've spent the last 3 weeks being successful and miserable, and I realized something. What? I'd rather fail at being happy with you than succeed at being lonely without you. Ethan didn't say anything for a long moment. Behind him, Victoria could see into the house, the messy living room, the couch with its sagging cushions, the drawing Mia had made still on the fridge. That's a nice speech, he said finally, but speeches are easy, following through is hard. I know. Mia cried for 2 days after you stopped coming around. She kept asking if she'd done something wrong. The guilt hit Victoria like a physical blow. I'm sorry, I didn't think. No, you didn't, because you're used to making clean breaks, ending things efficiently. But you can't do that with a 7-year-old. You can't just disappear and expect her to understand it's not personal. You're right, I screwed up. I'm going to keep screwing up because I don't know what I'm doing. Victoria stepped closer. But I want to learn. I want to try. If you'll give me another chance. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, ran a hand through his hair. Come inside, he said. It's cold. The house was exactly as she remembered, warm and cluttered, and lived in. Ethan grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, handed her one without asking if she wanted it. They sat on the couch, not quite touching, the silence heavy between them. I can't do this halfway, Ethan said finally. If you're in, you're all in. That means showing up even when it's hard. Even when work is crazy and you have important meetings, and it would be easier to cancel. It means being someone Mia can count on. I understand. Do you? Because it's one thing to say it now, when you're feeling guilty and romantic. It's another thing to actually live it. He turned to look at her. What happens when your board demands your attention? When there's a crisis that requires you to work 18-hour days? When choosing us means disappointing people who are used to you always choosing work? Then I disappoint them. Just like that? No, not just like that. It'll be hard. I'll probably resent it sometimes. I'll definitely mess it up. Victoria set down her beer, faced him fully. But I'm willing to try because the alternative, going back to my empty penthouse and my perfect life that doesn't actually feel like living, is worse. Ethan was quiet, studying her face like he was trying to read something written in a language he didn't quite speak. What do you want from this? He asked. Honestly, not the romantic version, the real version. Victoria thought about it, trying to articulate something she'd never quite put into words before. I want Tuesday afternoons that turn into Wednesdays and Thursdays. I want to learn how to make terrible dinosaur pancakes. I want Mia to stop calling me Ms. Victoria like I'm her teacher. She paused. I want to matter to someone for reasons that have nothing to do with money or power. I want to be chosen, not needed. And you think we can give you that? I think maybe we already have. I just wasn't brave enough to accept it. Ethan reached over, took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and Victoria remembered the first time Mia had grabbed her hand in the planetarium. The same trusting grip, the same assumption that she'd hold on. If we do this, Ethan said slowly, there are rules. Okay. You don't make promises to Mia that you can't keep. You don't show up randomly and disappear for weeks. You communicate with me, even when it's uncomfortable. He squeezed her hand. And you have to be honest about what you can and can't handle. Because I can deal with a lot, but I can't deal with you lying to protect my feelings or pretending you're fine when you're not. I can do that. Can you? Because you've spent your whole life being in control. This requires letting go. Then I'll learn how to let go. Ethan pulled her closer, and Victoria let herself lean into him, her head on his shoulder, breathing in the smell of laundry detergent and something uniquely him. My father thinks I'm making a huge mistake, she said quietly. What do you think? I think maybe the biggest mistake would be walking away from this because I'm scared. They sat like that for a while, not talking, just existing together in the quiet house. Upstairs, Mia was sleeping, unaware that the woman who'd disappeared from her life was back. Victoria wondered what she'd say, how she'd react, whether she'd forgive the absence or hold on to it. She's going to be mad at you, Ethan said, reading her thoughts. Fair warning. I deserve that. Yeah, you do. He shifted slightly, his arm around her shoulders. But she'll get over it. Kids are resilient like that. It's the adults who hold grudges. Are you holding a grudge? I'm deciding. He was quiet for a moment. You hurt her. You hurt me too, if I'm being honest. Walking away without explanation, going silent for 3 weeks, that's not how you treat people you care about. I know. I'm sorry. I don't want sorry. I want different. I want you to actually show up and do the work. Ethan turned to look at her. Can you do that? Victoria met his eyes, saw the challenge there, the hope, the fear. All the things she was feeling reflected back at her. Yes, she said. I can do that. Then we'll try. Again. But Victoria, his voice went serious. This is your last chance. You don't get to run again. You don't get to disappear when things get hard. If you're going to be part of our lives, you're all in. Understand? I understand. He kissed her then, soft and tentative, like he was still deciding whether this was a good idea. Victoria kissed him back, and it felt like falling and flying at the same time, terrifying and exhilarating and nothing like the controlled, strategic relationships she'd had before. When they broke apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. Don't make me regret this, he whispered. I'll try not to. That's not good enough. Then I won't. I won't make you regret this. It was a promise she had no idea if she could keep, but she meant it anyway. The next morning, Victoria woke up on Ethan's couch, disoriented and stiff. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, and she could hear movement in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, the sound of cartoons on low volume. She sat up, realized she was covered with a blanket she didn't remember pulling over herself. Her shoes were off, placed neatly by the couch. Ethan must have done that after she'd fallen asleep. When she walked into the kitchen, Mia was sitting at the table eating cereal, still in her pajamas. She looked up, saw Victoria, and her expression went carefully blank. You came back, Mia said, her voice neutral in a way that was worse than anger. I did. Are you going to leave again? Ethan was at the stove making eggs, but Victoria could feel him listening, could feel the weight of his attention even though he wasn't looking at her. She pulled out a chair, sat down across from Mia. I'm not planning to. That's not the same as promising. You're right. It's not. Victoria took a breath. I messed up, Mia. I got scared and I ran away. And that wasn't fair to you. I should have talked to your dad, explained what I was feeling. Instead, I just disappeared and I'm sorry. Mia stirred her cereal, not eating it. Daddy said you needed time to think. I did, and I thought about a lot of things. But mostly, I thought about you and your dad and how much I missed being here. If you missed us, why didn't you come back sooner? It was a fair question, delivered with the blunt honesty of a child who didn't understand adult complications. Because I was scared, Victoria admitted. I've never been part of a family before. Not really. And I didn't know if I could be good at it. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to try. Mia finally looked up, her eyes serious. That's what Daddy always says. You just have to try. Ethan brought over a plate of eggs, set it in front of Victoria without comment. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw something in his expression. Approval, maybe. Or hope. Your daughter is very wise, Victoria said to him. She gets it from me, Ethan replied, deadpan. Mia giggled, and just like that, the tension broke. She launched into a detailed explanation of everything Victoria had missed. A project at school, a new book she was reading, the fact that they'd gotten a fish named Captain Bubbles, who was definitely the smartest fish in the world. Victoria listened, ate her eggs, and felt something in her chest loosen. This was what she'd been missing. Not just Ethan or Mia individually, but this. The casual morning chaos, the easy conversation, the sense of belonging to something beyond herself. After breakfast, Ethan had to take Mia to school. Victoria offered to come, and Mia grabbed her hand without hesitation, apparently having forgiven the 3-week absence with the quick mercy of childhood. In the car, Mia chattered nonstop while Ethan drove and Victoria sat in the passenger seat, watching the city slide past. This was so different from her usual morning, the town car, the silence, the preparation for whatever battle the day would bring. At the school, Mia hugged them both goodbye and ran off to join her friends, her backpack bouncing. Victoria and Ethan stood by the car, watching her go. "She forgave you pretty quickly," Ethan observed. "Kids are resilient. You said so yourself." "Doesn't mean you're off the hook with me." Victoria turned to look at him. "I know. What do I need to do to get off the hook?" "Stick around, show up, be here even when it's boring or hard or inconvenient." He checked his watch. "Speaking of which, I have to get to the office. We have a meeting with the expansion team at 10. "I know, I'm on the agenda." "As the boss? Or as my girlfriend?" The word landed between them, strange and new and a little scary. "Can I be both?" Victoria asked. "I don't know. Can you?" It was a real question, one that deserved a real answer. Victoria thought about her father's warning, about the board's expectations, about the clean separation between personal and professional she'd always maintained. "I'm going to try," she said finally. "But, Ethan, I need you to tell me if it gets weird. If people at Edubridge start treating you differently because we're together. If it compromises your authority. Deal. And you need to tell me if I'm asking too much. If showing up for Mia's stuff is interfering with things you actually need to handle." "I will." They stood there for another moment, neither quite ready to leave, both aware that they were stepping into territory neither had navigated before. "This is terrifying," Victoria admitted. "Yeah, it really is." Ethan reached over, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But maybe that's how you know it matters." The meeting at 10 was awkward in all the ways Victoria had worried about. She was the boss, the owner of the company, sitting in a conference room with Ethan and Sarah and the rest of the leadership team. But she was also Ethan's girlfriend, a fact that nobody mentioned but everyone was clearly aware of. Sarah kept shooting her curious looks. The CFO seemed unsure whether to defer to Victoria or to Ethan. The whole dynamic was off, and Victoria could feel herself retreating into CEO mode as a defense mechanism. "The expansion into Texas is ahead of schedule," Sarah was saying, pulling up metrics on the screen. "We've got 12 districts ready to sign contracts, with another 8 in negotiations." "That's good," Victoria said, her voice crisp and professional. "What's the timeline for implementation?" They went through the details, and Victoria made notes, asked pointed questions, and tried to ignore the way Ethan was watching her, like he was trying to figure out which version of her was real. After the meeting, he caught her in the hallway. "You went full CEO in there," he said. "I am the CEO of HaleTech, which owns this company." "I know, but you also just spent the morning having breakfast with my daughter and dropping her off at school. It's whiplash watching you switch between the two." Victoria felt defensive, though she wasn't sure why. "What did you want me to do? Show up to a business meeting and act like we're on a date?" "No, I just—" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "Never mind. You're right. This is complicated, and we're both figuring it out. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be difficult." "You're not being difficult. You're being you." He softened slightly. "Which is what I signed up for, even if it's going to take some getting used to." They stood in the hallway of Edubridge's modest office space, and Victoria was acutely aware of people walking past, of curious glances, of the fact that their relationship was now very public in this small world. "I should get back to my office," she said. "I have calls this afternoon." "Okay, are you—" Ethan hesitated. "Are you coming over tonight? For dinner?" It was such a simple question, but it felt loaded with meaning. Was this going to be a regular thing? Was she integrating into their daily life? What did that actually look like? "If you want me to," Victoria said carefully. "I do. Mia does. But I need to know you want to be there, not that you feel obligated." "I want to be there." "Then come. 6:30. And Victoria? He waited until she met his eyes. You can be both versions of yourself, you know. The CEO and the woman who eats breakfast with us. They don't have to be separate. But Victoria wasn't sure that was true. She'd spent 30 years learning to compartmentalize, to keep personal and professional in separate boxes. Letting them blur felt dangerous, like she'd lose control of both. Still, she showed up at 6:30, still in her work clothes because she hadn't had time to go home and change. Mia answered the door, already in her pajamas, even though it was barely evening. Daddy said I could wear them after homework, she explained, leading Victoria inside. We're making tacos. Making tacos turned into a messy affair involving spilled cheese and an incident with the sour cream that resulted in Mia needing a complete outfit change. Victoria found herself laughing more than she had all day, her expensive suit now splattered with taco fixings, her careful composure completely abandoned. After dinner, while Ethan was giving Mia a bath, Victoria sat on the couch and checked her phone. 37 emails, most of them urgent according to the subject lines. A text from Marcus asking about tomorrow's board meeting. 3 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She should be working, should be preparing for the board meeting, reviewing the quarterly numbers, making sure everything was perfect. Instead, she was sitting on a sagging couch in Queens listening to Mia sing loudly and off-key in the bath, waiting for Ethan to finish bedtime so they could maybe watch something mindless on TV. Her phone buzzed again. Her father. She almost didn't answer, but Richard Hale wasn't someone who gave up easily. Victoria, I've been trying to reach you. I've been busy. Too busy to return your father's calls? Or too busy playing house in Queens? Victoria stood up, moved to the kitchen where the conversation would be more private. What do you want, Dad? I want to know if you've lost your mind. The board is concerned. Your performance has been slipping. You're distracted. My performance is fine. The company is profitable. Profitable isn't exceptional. You've always been exceptional. Until now. Her father's voice hardened. I'm giving you one chance to end this before it becomes a real problem. Walk away from this relationship. Focus on Hale Tech, and we'll forget this ever happened. And if I don't, then I'll have to take action to protect the company. The threat was clear. Her father still held significant shares in Hale Tech, still had influence with the board. If he wanted to make her life difficult, he could. You don't control me anymore, Victoria said quietly. I'm trying to save you from yourself. No, you're trying to turn me into you, and I'm done with that. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Through the doorway, she could see into the living room where Mia's toys were scattered across the floor, could hear Ethan reading a bedtime story upstairs. This was real, this mattered, and she wasn't going to let her father take it away. When Ethan came back downstairs, he found her still in the kitchen, staring at her phone. Everything okay? My father threatened me. Professionally, I mean. He's going to try to push me out of Hale Tech if I don't end this. Ethan's expression went carefully neutral. And what are you going to do? Victoria looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd chosen his daughter over $1 million deal, who made terrible pancakes and coached her through bedtime stories, who was brave enough to let her into his life, even though she'd already proven she could hurt him. I'm going to fight him, she said, because this, us, is worth fighting for. Ethan crossed the kitchen, pulled her into his arms and held her while she tried not to cry. She wasn't a crier, hadn't cried in years, maybe decades. But standing in this small kitchen with this good man, knowing that choosing him meant going to war with her father, all the emotion she'd been holding back came flooding up. It's going to get ugly, she said into his shoulder. I know. He'll make it public. He'll question my judgment, my competence. He'll try to destroy what I've built. Can he? Victoria pulled back, wiped at her eyes. I don't know. Maybe. But I'm not going to make it easy for him. What do you need from me? It was such a simple question, asked with such sincerity, that Victoria almost started crying again. Just this, she said. Just you and Mia, and knowing I have something real to come home to. You've got it. They stood in the kitchen, holding each other while the house settled into its evening quiet, and Victoria realized that for the first time in her life, she'd chosen someone, over her career. And instead of feeling like a sacrifice, it felt like freedom. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Friday, and Victoria spent the entire night before preparing. Not just reviewing numbers and projections, she could do that in her sleep, but preparing for a fight. Her father would be there. He'd called an emergency session, citing concerns about leadership and direction, which was code for, "I'm going to try to humiliate my daughter in front of the entire board." Ethan had offered to come with her for moral support, which was sweet but impractical. "You can't sit in on a Hailtech board meeting," she'd told him the night before, lying in his bed, their bed, she was starting to think of it, though she still kept her penthouse for appearances. "You're not on the board, and it would just give my father more ammunition." "So what are you going to do?" "Win." She'd said it with more confidence than she felt. Now, standing outside the conference room at 8:45, Victoria felt her armor clicking into place. The slate gray suit, perfectly tailored, the diamond earrings, subtle but expensive, the expression she'd perfected over 12 years, calm, controlled, untouchable. Marcus met her at the door. "Your father arrived early. He's already in there with Jenkins and Matthews." Two of the board members who'd been loyal to Richard since the beginning. Of course. "Let them talk. I'm not worried." Another lie. She was terrified. "For what it's worth," Marcus said quietly, "I've prepared a counter-presentation. Financial data showing Hailtech's growth over the last 5 years under your leadership. Comparison metrics with competitors. Your track record speaks for itself." "Thank you, Marcus." "Don't thank me. Just don't let him win." Victoria walked into that conference room like she was walking into battle, because that's exactly what it was. The board members were already seated, 10 people who held the power to vote her out if they wanted to. Her father sat at the far end of the table, looking calm and confident, like he'd already won. "Victoria," he said, his voice professionally pleasant. "Glad you could make it." "It's my company, Dad. Where else would I be?" She took her seat at the head of the table, directly across from him. A power move, one she'd learned from him. The meeting started with routine business, quarterly reports, approval of minor expenditures, updates on various divisions. Victoria handled it smoothly, demonstrating the competence and control she'd always brought to these meetings. Then her father made his move. "Before we adjourn, I'd like to address a concern that's been brought to my attention." He opened a folder, pulled out documents. Several board members have expressed worry about Victoria's recent distraction from Hailtech's core mission. "Distraction?" Victoria kept her voice level. "Can you be more specific?" "Your acquisition of EduBridge, a struggling education technology company with questionable profit margins. The board approved it based on your recommendation, but the return on investment has been minimal." "EduBridge is performing above projections," Victoria countered. "Revenue is up 30% since acquisition. We've expanded into 5 new states. The platform is a charity project," her father interrupted. "And while I applaud your sudden interest in philanthropy, it's not what Hailtech does. We're an enterprise technology company, not a social service." Jenkins spoke up, his voice careful. "Richard, the EduBridge acquisition was thoroughly vetted. We all voted to approve it." Under the assumption that Victoria would maintain her typical level of oversight. Instead, she's been spending an inappropriate amount of time personally managing a relatively small acquisition. Richard looked directly at Victoria. "Care to explain why?" The room went quiet. Everyone knew what he was really asking. Everyone had probably heard the rumors about her and Ethan. Victoria could feel the trap closing. If she admitted to the relationship, her father would use it as evidence of compromised judgment. If she denied it, she'd be lying, and that would come out eventually. "I've been hands-on with EduBridge because I believe in its mission," she said carefully. "Unlike our other acquisitions, which focus purely on profit maximization, EduBridge has the potential to create meaningful social impact while remaining financially viable." "Social impact." Her father's voice dripped with disdain. "Since when did you care about social impact?" "Since I realized that sustainable business isn't just about quarterly earnings. It's about building something that lasts, that matters." "And this sudden philosophical shift has nothing to do with your personal relationship with EduBridge's founder?" There it was, out in the open. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Matthews was staring at his papers. Jenkins looked troubled. Sarah Chen, the youngest board member and the only one Victoria really trusted, met her eyes with an expression that said, "Handle this carefully." "My personal life is not the board's concern," Victoria said. It is when it affects your judgment, when it compromises your ability to lead this company effectively. Richard leaned forward. Victoria, I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to protect Hale Tech. You've done brilliant work for 12 years, but recently you've been unfocused, missing meetings, delegating decisions you used to handle personally, spending time on a small acquisition while ignoring larger opportunities. I haven't missed a single board meeting in 12 years. No, but you've missed 3 executive strategy sessions in the last 2 months. You declined the Singapore expansion opportunity without proper analysis. I declined Singapore because the market conditions weren't favorable and the timing was wrong. I can show you the analysis. The analysis your assistant prepared because you were too busy attending elementary school science fairs. The room went dead silent. Victoria felt heat rising in her chest, anger mixing with humiliation. He'd been having her followed, or maybe just tracking her movements through her company calendar. Either way, it was a violation, and it was effective. How I spend my personal time is my business, she said, her voice tight. Not when you're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. Every choice you make reflects on Hale Tech. Every relationship, every priority, every decision. Richard stood up, commanding the room the way he always had. I propose we table this discussion for now, but with the understanding that Victoria needs to refocus her attention on what matters. Hale Tech's growth, our shareholders' interests, the strategic vision that's made us successful. And if I don't agree with your definition of what matters, then perhaps we need to reconsider whether you're still the right person to lead this company. The threat hung in the air, explicit and undeniable. Her father was prepared to push her out if she didn't fall in line. Sarah spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. With all due respect, Richard, Hale Tech's performance under Victoria's leadership has been exceptional. Stock price is up 40% since she took over. We've successfully acquired and integrated 7 companies. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high. One relationship doesn't negate 12 years of brilliant work. Unless that relationship is compromising her judgment, Richard shot back. Is it? Sarah looked at Victoria. Has your relationship with Ethan Cole affected your decisions regarding EduBridge's business operations? Victoria met Sarah's eyes, grateful for the lifeline. No. Every decision I've made regarding EduBridge has been based on data and strategic analysis. The company is profitable, growing, and aligned with Hale Tech's expansion into education technology. My relationship with Ethan is separate from my business judgment. Can you honestly say you would have acquired EduBridge if you hadn't developed personal feelings for its founder? Her father pressed. That was the question, wasn't it? The one Victoria had been avoiding asking herself. I acquired EduBridge because the platform works and the mission matters, she said slowly. Did meeting Ethan influence that decision? Maybe, but not in the way you're suggesting. He showed me that success doesn't have to come at the expense of impact, that you can build something meaningful and profitable. That's a lovely sentiment, Richard said, but sentiment doesn't generate returns for shareholders. Actually, it does. Victoria pulled up her own presentation, the one she'd prepared with Marcus. Companies with strong social missions have 23% higher employee retention, 30% better brand loyalty, and consistently outperform purely profit-driven competitors in long-term growth. EduBridge isn't a charity project. It's a strategic bet on the future of education technology, a market projected to reach $300 billion by 2028. We got in early, we're building brand recognition, and we're positioning Hale Tech as a leader in mission-driven tech. She clicked through slides showing market analysis, growth projections, competitive positioning, all the data her father claimed to care about. This is about more than one acquisition, she continued. It's about where Hale Tech goes next. We can keep chasing enterprise contracts and quarterly targets, or we can build something that lasts, something that matters beyond our stock price. And you think you can do that while splitting your focus between work and playing house and queens? The contempt in his voice was like a slap. Victoria felt herself go cold, that familiar shutdown she'd perfected over years of dealing with her father's disapproval. I think I can do both, she said quietly. I have to believe I can do both. Then you're deluding yourself. Richard gathered his papers. I'm calling for a vote, a formal review of Victoria's leadership, to be conducted over the next 90 days. During that time, she'll need to demonstrate that her personal life isn't interfering with her professional responsibilities. That's ridiculous, Sarah started, but Richard cut her off. It's prudent. All in favor? 3 hands went up. Richards, Jenkins's, Matthews. The 3 board members who'd been with the company since the beginning, who still saw Victoria as Richards' daughter rather than her own person. Opposed? 5 hands, including Sarah's. Victoria's own vote didn't count in this case. Conflict of interest. Motion fails, Sarah said firmly. There's no basis for a formal review. Victoria's performance speaks for itself. But the damage was done. Everyone in that room now knew that Victoria's position wasn't as secure as it had been, that her father was willing to challenge her publicly, that her relationship with Ethan had become a vulnerability that could be exploited. The meeting adjourned shortly after, board members filing out with awkward glances and careful neutrality. Only Sarah lingered. That was brutal, she said once they were alone. That was my father. Victoria started gathering her materials, her hands shaking slightly. Thank you for speaking up. I meant what I said. Your performance has been excellent. One relationship doesn't change that. Sarah paused. But Victoria, you need to be careful. Richard's not going to let this go. If you want to keep both, the company and Ethan, you're going to have to prove you can handle it. I know. Can you handle both? Victoria looked at Sarah, this woman barely 30 who'd built her own company before joining Heltech's board, who'd somehow figured out how to be brilliant and successful and also have a life outside of work. I don't know, Victoria admitted, but I'm going to try. After Sarah left, Victoria sat alone in the conference room for a long time, staring at the table where she'd just fought for her right to have a personal life. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, Marcus checking in, her PR team wanting to know if there was fallout, various executives needing decisions on things that suddenly felt trivial. Finally, a text from Ethan. How'd it go? Victoria stared at that message, trying to figure out how to answer. How did you explain that choosing love had made you a target? That the father who'd raised you was now actively trying to destroy your career? She called instead of texting. Ethan answered on the second ring. Hey, you okay? No. The word came out broken. It was bad, Ethan. He came after me in front of the entire board, made it clear that if I don't end this, he's going to keep pushing until I'm out. Can he do that? Eventually, maybe. He still has enough influence, enough allies. If he makes enough noise about my judgment being compromised, about me being distracted. Victoria rubbed her eyes, suddenly exhausted. I built this company from what he gave me into something 10 times bigger, and he's willing to tear it down because I fell in love with someone he doesn't approve of. The words hung there. Fell in love. She'd said it without thinking, without the careful control she usually brought to emotional declarations. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Did you mean that? Mean what? That you're in love with me. Victoria closed her eyes. Yes, I meant it, though this is probably the worst possible time to say it for the first time. I disagree. I think it's exactly the right time. She could hear the smile in his voice. For what it's worth, I'm in love with you too, even though you're about to make my life incredibly complicated. It's already complicated. Fair point. He paused. What do you need right now? I need to see you, and Mia. I need to remember why I'm fighting this battle. Then come over. We're making cookies. Well, Mia's making cookies. I'm mostly just trying to prevent kitchen fires. Victoria laughed despite everything. I'll be there in an hour. She stopped at her penthouse first, changed out of her armor and into jeans and a sweater. Clothes that still felt foreign, but were getting more familiar. The penthouse felt even more like a museum than usual, perfect and untouched and utterly lifeless. She grabbed a few more items, toiletries, a change of clothes for tomorrow, her laptop, adding them to the collection of things she'd been gradually moving to Ethan's house over the past few weeks. It wasn't a conscious decision to move in, exactly, more like a slow migration toward the place that actually felt like home. When she got to Queens, Mia opened the door covered in flour and chocolate. Victoria, we're making double chocolate chip cookies, but the recipe is really hard. And Daddy says we might have added too much butter, but I think you can never have too much butter. That sounds like solid logic to me, Victoria said, following Mia into the kitchen where Ethan was surveying what looked like the aftermath of a very enthusiastic baking session. Don't judge, he said immediately. We're learning. I'm not judging. I'm helping. Victoria rolled up her sleeves, surveyed the damage. Okay, what's the actual recipe say? They spent the next hour trying to salvage the cookie dough, which involved adding more flour and less optimism about the butter situation. Mia narrated the entire process like a cooking show host, providing commentary on technique and ingredient ratios with the confidence of someone who'd never actually successfully made cookies before. By the time they got the first batch in the oven, Victoria had flour in her hair and chocolate on her sweater, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this content. "How was your meeting?" Ethan asked quietly, while Mia was occupied with licking the beaters. "Mia, do not lick that," Victoria started, then stopped. "Actually, I don't know if that's a real rule or just something adults say." "It's a real rule because of salmonella," Ethan said, "but also a rule we definitely broke as kids, so—" He handed Mia the beater. "Just this once." Mia's resulting grin was worth whatever minor food safety violation they were committing. "The meeting was brutal," Victoria said, turning back to Ethan's question. "My father basically declared war. He didn't quite call for a vote of no confidence, but he made it clear he's building toward that." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. This has been coming for years. I've just been avoiding it by being perfect, by never giving him anything to criticize. But perfectionism is exhausting, and it's lonely, and I'm done with it." Ethan pulled her close, careful of the flour and chocolate situation. "For the record, I think you're pretty amazing, even when you're not perfect." "Especially when she's not perfect," Mia chimed in. "Perfect is boring." "When did you get so wise?" Victoria asked. "I've always been wise. You're just noticing now." The cookies turned out okay. A little flat, slightly over-buttered, but edible. They ate them warm from the oven while watching a movie Mia had picked, some animated thing about talking animals that Victoria found herself actually enjoying. Halfway through, Mia fell asleep with her head on Victoria's lap. Ethan moved to carry her to bed, but Victoria stopped him. "Let her stay, just for a little while." So they sat there, this makeshift family on a worn couch in a house that needed repairs, and Victoria realized she'd been wrong about what mattered. It wasn't the penthouse or the company or the empire she'd built. It was these quiet moments, this sense of belonging, this feeling of being chosen for who she was rather than what she could provide. After they finally got Mia to bed, Victoria and Ethan sat in the kitchen with tea neither of them really wanted, both processing what came next. "What are you going to do?" Ethan asked. "About your father." "Fight him, but smartly. He's expecting me to either back down or make an emotional decision he can use against me. Instead, I'm going to outwork him, outthink him, and prove that I can run Hailtech better than he ever did while also having a life." "That sounds exhausting." "It will be, but the alternative is giving up either you or my company, and I'm not willing to do that." Ethan reached across the table, took her hand. "You know you don't have to prove anything to me, right? I don't need you to be CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. I just need you to be here." "I know, but I need to prove it to myself." Victoria squeezed his hand. "I spent my whole life becoming what my father wanted, building what he started. And I'm good at it. I'm great at it, actually. But I'm also good at this. At being with you and Mia, at making terrible cookies and showing up for school events. And I don't want to have to choose between those versions of myself. So don't choose, be both. It's not that simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we make it complicated because we think success has to hurt. That if we're not sacrificing something, we're not working hard enough." Ethan stood up, pulled her to her feet. "What if the real challenge isn't balancing work and life? What if it's believing you deserve both?" The words hit Victoria harder than anything her father had said in that boardroom, because that was the core of it, wasn't it? She didn't believe she deserved both. She'd been raised to think that success required sacrifice, that you couldn't have it all, that happiness was something you earned through suffering. "I don't know if I believe that," she admitted quietly. "Then that's what we work on. Together." They went to bed, a phrase that still felt surreal to Victoria, who'd spent so many years sleeping alone in her pristine penthouse. And she lay awake long after Ethan fell asleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out her next move. Her father expected her to fold, to choose the safe path, the one that kept Hailtech secure and her life uncomplicated. He expected her to be rational, strategic, controlled, so she'd have to be something else. The next morning, Victoria called an emergency meeting with her executive team. Not the full board, Just the people who reported directly to her, the ones who actually ran Hailtech's day-to-day operations. I need your honest assessment, she told them, looking around the conference table at the faces of people she'd hired, trained, trusted. Has my performance declined in the last 3 months? Marcus spoke first. Your output is different. You're delegating more, which frankly you should have been doing years ago. But the quality of decision-making hasn't changed. I disagree, said Tom, the CFO. He was in his 50s, had been with the company almost as long as Victoria. You've missed critical details lately. The Singapore analysis was incomplete. You haven't been in the weeds on the cloud infrastructure expansion. Because I hired experts to handle those details. That's what good leadership looks like, trusting your team. Or it's what distraction looks like when you're trying to rationalize it, Tom countered. I'm not saying you're doing a bad job, but you're not doing the job the same way, and that's causing uncertainty. Victoria appreciated the honesty, even if it stung. What would it take to resolve that uncertainty? Consistency, said Jennifer, the COO. Prove that you can maintain the same level of excellence while also having a personal life. Right now, people are watching to see if you can actually do both. People like my father. People like the board, the shareholders, the executive team. We're all wondering if this is a temporary distraction or a permanent shift in your priorities. It was a fair question, one Victoria had been avoiding asking herself. Here's what I know, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. I built Hailtech into what it is today by working 80-hour weeks and sacrificing everything else. And I was good at it, but I was also miserable, lonely, successful in every measurable way, and empty in all the ways that actually matter. She looked around the table. I met someone who showed me there's another way, that you can care about your work and also care about the people in your life, that success doesn't have to mean isolation. And yes, learning to balance those things has been messy. I've made mistakes. I've been less available than I used to be. But I'm also thinking more clearly, making better decisions, building something sustainable instead of just chasing quarterly targets. So to answer your question about what's different, I'm different. I'm trying to be a whole person instead of just a CEO. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, that's a problem we need to solve, not a reason for me to go back to who I was. The room was quiet. Tom looked skeptical. Jennifer looked thoughtful. Marcus looked proud. Okay, Jennifer said finally. So how do we solve it? How do you prove to the board that you can do both? I show them. I deliver exceptional results for the next 90 days. I'm present, engaged, strategic, and I also maintain my personal life because that's not negotiable anymore. Victoria pulled up a document she'd drafted at 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep. Here's my proposal. We accelerate the Education Technology Initiative, make it a cornerstone of Hailtech's strategy instead of treating it like a side project. We double down on EduBridge's success and use it as a proof of concept for mission-driven growth. That's risky, Tom said. If it fails, it won't fail. The data supports it, the market opportunity is real, and I'm going to make damn sure it succeeds. Victoria looked at each of them. I need your help. I need you to hold me accountable, to call me out when I'm actually dropping balls, to support me when I'm making hard choices. Can you do that? They agreed, though Tom still looked doubtful. But Victoria didn't need universal approval. She just needed her team to be willing to try something different. The next 90 days were the hardest of Victoria's life. She worked longer hours than she had in years, but also left at 6 p.m. every Tuesday and Thursday to have dinner with Ethan and Mia. She attended every board meeting, delivered every report, closed 2 major deals, and also made it to Mia's school play and her parent-teacher conference. Her father watched it all with disapproval barely concealed as professional concern. At each board meeting, he found something to criticize: a missed opportunity, a delayed decision, a delegation he considered inappropriate. Victoria responded with data, with results, with the undeniable fact that Hailtech was thriving under her leadership. But it was exhausting. Some days she felt like she was being pulled apart, stretched too thin between competing demands. Some nights she came home to Ethan's house too tired to do anything but collapse on the couch. Some mornings she woke up wondering if her father was right, if she really could maintain this pace without something breaking. "You look terrible," Ethan told her one evening, finding her on the couch with her laptop, working on a presentation that was due the next day. "Thanks. That's exactly what every woman wants to hear." "I'm serious. When's the last time you slept more than 5 hours? Victoria tried to remember and couldn't. I'll sleep after the board meeting on Friday. Just need to get through the 90-day review. And then what? There'll be another crisis, another deadline, another reason to push yourself past breaking. Ethan sat down next to her, gently closed her laptop. This isn't sustainable. I know, but if I can just prove, you don't have to prove anything. You're already the most competent person in every room you enter. The question isn't whether you're good enough. It's whether you're willing to keep sacrificing yourself to satisfy people who'll never be satisfied. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, surprising herself. She was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of proving, tired of trying to be perfect in two different worlds simultaneously. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Be both things. Not just survive it, but actually do it well. Maybe you don't have to do it well. Maybe you just have to do it honestly. Ethan pulled her close. Stop trying to be perfect. Just be here, however that looks. What if that's not enough? For who? Your father? He's never going to think you're enough because this isn't really about you. It's about him maintaining control. Ethan tilted her face up to look at him. But for me and Mia, you're already more than enough. Even when you're exhausted and stressed and barely holding it together. Especially then. Victoria let herself cry, really cry, for the first time in months. All the pressure, all the fear, all the impossible standards she'd been trying to meet. Ethan held her through it, didn't try to fix it, just let her feel it. When she finally stopped, he handed her a tissue and said, Mia made you something. She was going to wait until tomorrow, but I think you need it now. He disappeared into the kitchen, came back with a drawing. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall with triangle dress, Victoria, one medium, Ethan, one small, Mia. Above them, in Mia's careful handwriting, Our Family. Victoria stared at that drawing, at the simple declaration of belonging, and felt something shift inside her. This was worth fighting for. Not her father's approval, not the board's validation, but this, being part of something real and messy and imperfect and completely beautiful. I need to talk to him, she said suddenly. My father. Actually talk to him, not just fight with him in board meetings. Are you sure that's a good idea? No, but I need to do it anyway. She called her father the next morning, arranged to meet him for lunch at the club he preferred. Neutral territory, public enough that he couldn't explode, but private enough for honesty. Richard Hale arrived exactly on time, as always. He kissed her cheek, sat down across from her, and ordered his usual scotch before saying, This is unexpected. I want to talk, really talk, not just exchange corporate pleasantries. About what? About why you're trying so hard to push me out of the company I built. Her father's expression didn't change. I'm not pushing you out. I'm trying to save you from a mistake that will derail everything you've worked for. By threatening my position, by questioning my judgment in front of the board, by forcing you to confront reality. Victoria, you're one of the brightest people I know. You've taken Hale Tech further than I ever imagined. But this relationship, this fantasy you're pursuing, it's going to destroy you. Why? Victoria leaned forward. Why does having a personal life mean I can't be successful professionally? You and Mom managed to build a company and have a family. We didn't have a family. We had you, and we had nannies to raise you, and we had a marriage that was more partnership than passion. It worked because we both understood what mattered, the company, the legacy, the empire we were building. Your mother and I were aligned on that. We made sacrifices, but they were worth it. Were they? You built an empire and lost a relationship with your daughter in the process. Was that worth it? Richard sat back, his expression hardening. I gave you everything. The best education, the best opportunities, a company to run. You gave me everything except yourself. Except love that wasn't conditional on achievement. Except the belief that I could be valued for who I am, not what I accomplish. That's not fair, isn't it? Victoria felt the old anger rising, but also something else, clarity. I spent 30 years trying to earn your approval, trying to be perfect enough, successful enough, strategic enough. And it was never enough because you don't actually want me to be happy. You want me to be you. I want you to be great, to fulfill your potential. I am great, and I'm also in love with someone who makes me want to be human, not just successful. Why can't those things coexist? Her father was quiet for a long moment, his drink forgotten. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, almost sad. Because they can't. Not at the level you're playing. Your mother tried. She wanted more time with you, wanted to cut back on travel, wanted to be present. And the company suffered. We lost deals, lost momentum, lost respect. I had to push twice as hard to make up for her distraction. So you pushed her out too. I didn't push her out. She chose. And eventually she realized the cost was too high. Richard looked at Victoria with something that might have been pain if she didn't know him better. I don't want you to have to make that choice. But if you keep dividing your attention, someone else will make it for you. The board, the shareholders, they'll find someone who's willing to give HailTech everything. Let them try. Victoria stood up. I'm done choosing between being successful and being human. I'm done letting you define what my life should look like. And I'm done fighting for your approval. Victoria, I love you, Dad, but I love me more. And that means building a life that's actually worth living, not just worth putting on a resume. She walked out of the club without looking back, her heart pounding, but her head clear. For the first time in her life, she'd chosen herself over her father's expectations. And it felt like freedom. The 90-day review came on a rainy Tuesday in February, almost exactly 1 year after Ethan had walked out of Victoria's office to save his daughter. Victoria arrived at HailTech's headquarters early, her presentation loaded, her arguments rehearsed, her armor perfectly in place. But something was different this time. She wasn't fighting to prove herself anymore. She was fighting to protect what she'd built, both the company and the life. The boardroom filled slowly. Sarah arrived first, gave Victoria an encouraging nod. Jenkins and Matthews came in together, whispering. Her father was last, settling into his seat with the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. Let's begin, Victoria said, standing at the head of the table. 90 days ago, concerns were raised about my leadership and focus. I'd like to address those concerns with data. She pulled up her first slide, HailTech's performance metrics over the past 3 months. Revenue up 18%. 2 major acquisitions completed ahead of schedule. Employee retention at 94%, the highest in company history. Stock price climbing steadily. During this period, HailTech has exceeded every projected target. We've expanded into 3 new markets, secured partnerships with 5 Fortune 500 companies, and launched our education technology initiative, which is already generating significant interest from both investors and clients. She clicked to the next slide. EduBridge's numbers. The struggling startup that her father had dismissed as a charity project was now profitable, growing at 35% quarter over quarter, with a waitlist of schools wanting to implement the platform. The concern was that my personal life was interfering with professional judgment. The data suggests otherwise. If anything, I'm making better decisions now than I was a year ago because I'm not burning out trying to prove I don't need anything or anyone. Her father leaned forward. Numbers can be manipulated to tell any story. What about the Singapore deal you passed on? That would have been worth $200 million. It would have required us to compromise our data privacy standards and work with a government known for human rights violations. I chose not to pursue it, and I'd make the same choice again. Profitability without ethics isn't success. It's just greed. Since when do you care about ethics over profit? Since I remembered that companies are built by people, for people, and people actually matter. Victoria met her father's eyes. You taught me to be ruthless, to win at any cost. But you never taught me why winning mattered, what it was for. It's for building something that lasts, creating value, generating wealth, leaving a legacy. I've done all that. HailTech is worth 10 times what it was when you handed it to me. I've created thousands of jobs, generated billions in value. The legacy is secure. Victoria turned to address the full board. The question isn't whether I can run this company. I've proven that repeatedly. The question is whether you're comfortable with a CEO who has a life outside this boardroom, who believes success doesn't require complete self-sacrifice. Sarah spoke up. I think that's exactly the kind of CEO we need. Someone who models sustainable leadership instead of burnout culture. I disagree, Matthews said. This isn't about work-life balance philosophy. It's about whether Victoria can maintain the intensity that made HailTech successful while also maintaining a relationship and effectively co-parenting someone else's child. The words hit harder than Victoria expected, someone else's child. Like Mia was just an accessory to her relationship with Ethan, not a person who mattered in her own right. Her name is Mia, Victoria said quietly. She's 7 years old. She wants to be a marine biologist. She makes terrible jokes and draws pictures of octopuses, and she's teaching me that there are things worth showing up for that have nothing to do with profit margins. That's very touching, her father said. But it's not relevant to whether you should be running a multi-billion-dollar company. It's completely relevant, because the alternative is what? Keep sacrificing everything until I'm 60 and alone and successful and empty? Build an empire that's so all-consuming it destroys any possibility of human connection? Victoria looked at her father. Is that really what you want for me? What you wanted for yourself? The room went very quiet. Richard Hale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or regret. I want you to fulfill your potential, he said finally. This is my potential. All of it. The CEO who closes deals and the woman who makes pancakes on Saturday mornings. The strategist who builds companies and the person who shows up for school plays. I'm not choosing between those versions of myself anymore. Then you're choosing to be mediocre at both. No, I'm choosing to be whole instead of hollow. Jenkins cleared his throat. I think we've heard enough philosophy. Let's address the practical question. Victoria, can you honestly say that your relationship hasn't affected your judgment regarding EduBridge? It was the question Victoria had been avoiding, the one she'd danced around for months. And sitting in that boardroom with her father's disapproving stare and the board's skeptical faces, she could have lied, could have maintained the professional distance, insisted that business was business and personal was personal and never the two shall meet. Instead, she told the truth. Yes, my relationship with Ethan absolutely affected my judgment regarding EduBridge. She watched the board members exchange glances. I acquired that company because I saw what he'd built, something that actually mattered, that helped kids who needed it, that proved you could be mission-driven and profitable. Did I make that decision partly because I was falling in love with him? Yes. Does that make it a bad decision? The numbers say no. But the conflict of interest, Matthews started. There's no conflict. I'm not profiting personally from EduBridge's success beyond HaleTech's returns, which benefit all shareholders. Ethan runs the company with full autonomy. I provide resources and oversight, same as I do with every HaleTech acquisition. The only difference is that I also happen to be in love with the founder. That's a significant difference, her father said. Why? Because it's unprofessional to care about people? Because feelings somehow invalidate business judgment? Victoria shook her head. I spent 30 years believing that, thinking that to be taken seriously, I had to be cold and strategic and never let personal considerations affect professional decisions. And you know what that got me? Success, yes, but also isolation, loneliness, a penthouse full of expensive things and no one to share them with. She stood up, moved to the window overlooking Manhattan. I'm not asking permission to have a personal life. I'm informing you that I have one. And I'm still the best person to run this company, not despite that, but because of it. Because I understand now that sustainable success requires balance, that burnout isn't a badge of honor, that you can build something meaningful without destroying yourself in the process. And if we disagree, her father asked, if the board decides that your divided attention is unacceptable, Victoria turned to face them. Then I'll resign. I'll walk away from HaleTech, start something new, and prove that there's a different way to build companies, a better way. She looked at each board member in turn. But I don't think that's what you want. I think you want what we've always had. Exceptional results, strategic growth, and leadership that sets the standard for the industry. I can still give you that. I'm just not willing to give up everything else anymore. The silence stretched. Her father's expression was unreadable. Sarah looked impressed. Matthews looked troubled. Jenkins was studying his notes like they contained the answer to a question he didn't want to ask. Finally, Sarah spoke. I move that we end this review. Victoria's performance over the past 90 days has been exemplary. Her personal life is irrelevant to her professional capabilities. All in favor? 6 hands went up. A majority. Her father kept his hand down, as did Matthews and Jenkins. But it was enough. Motion carries, Fem, Sarah said. The review is concluded. Victoria remains CEO with the full support of this board. Victoria felt something unclench in her chest. Not quite relief. It wasn't over, she knew that. Her father wouldn't give up this easily. But it was validation, proof that she could do both, be both, without sacrificing either. After the meeting ended and the board members filed out, her father lingered. They stood on opposite sides of the conference table, years of complicated history between them. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "This isn't about winning, it's about living. You'll regret this. When the relationship falls apart, when that man realizes you can't give him what he needs, when the daughter gets hurt because you're not equipped to be a parent, you'll regret choosing them over your career." Victoria walked around the table, stood close enough to see the lines around her father's eyes, the gray in his hair, the signs of age he tried to hide with expensive suits and controlled expressions. "Maybe," she said, "maybe it will fall apart. Maybe I'll fail at being a partner or a parent figure. Maybe I'll screw it up spectacularly." She paused. "But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have lived instead of just achieved. Can you say the same?" Richard Hale looked at his daughter, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years, and Victoria saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Not disapproval or disappointment, but something more painful. Recognition. The acknowledgement that she was right, that he'd chosen achievement over living, and it had cost him everything that mattered. "I did what I thought was right," he said finally. "I built something that would last. You built an empire, but you didn't build a life. And now you're trying to prevent me from building both because if I succeed, it proves you didn't have to choose, that all your sacrifices were just choices you made, not requirements for success." Her father flinched, and Victoria realized she'd finally hit the truth. This wasn't about her competence or her judgment. It was about his regret, his fear that she'd found a path he'd never believed existed. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm sorry you felt like you had to sacrifice everything, but I'm not going to make the same choice." "Then we have nothing more to discuss." He walked out without looking back, and Victoria stood alone in the conference room where she'd fought for her right to be human. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she just felt sad. For her father, for all the years he'd spent believing success required isolation, for the relationship they'd never quite managed to build. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "How'd it go?" Victoria smiled, typed back, "I'm still CEO, and I'm coming home." Home. Not her penthouse, not the office. Ethan's house in Queens, where Mia was probably doing homework at the kitchen table, and there would be dishes in the sink, and it would be warm and messy and real. That's where she belonged now. She stopped by her penthouse one last time on the way to Queens, stood in the middle of all that perfect, untouched space, and made a decision. The next day, she called a realtor. The penthouse went on the market for $15 million, sold in 3 days to a tech entrepreneur who probably wouldn't live in it any more than Victoria had. Moving her things to Ethan's house was strange and awkward and completely terrifying. Mia was thrilled, immediately claiming Victoria's presence as proof that she'd been right all along about them being a family. Ethan was more cautious, making sure Victoria understood what she was committing to. "This isn't temporary," he said, watching movers bring boxes into his small house. "Once you're here, you're here. Mia will expect that. I'll expect that." "I know." "Do you? Because you've never lived with anyone before. You've never had to share space or compromise on what to watch on TV or deal with someone else's schedule." "Then I'll learn." Victoria grabbed his hand. "I'm terrified for the record, but I'm doing it anyway." "Why?" "Because this is home, your home, and I'm tired of living anywhere else." The first few months were harder than Victoria expected. She was used to controlling her environment, to having everything exactly where and how she wanted it. Living with Ethan and Mia meant constant negotiation, bathroom schedules and closet space, and whose turn it was to decide dinner. It meant hearing someone else's music and tripping over someone else's shoes and having conversations about things like whether the toilet paper should roll over or under. It meant being accountable to people who needed her to show up consistently, not just when it was convenient. Some days she wanted to run back to her perfect, empty penthouse. Some nights she lay awake wondering if she'd made a huge mistake. Some mornings she looked at Ethan making terrible pancakes and Mia chattering about marine biology and felt completely overwhelmed by the responsibility of being part of their lives. But she stayed. And slowly, it got easier. Work remained intense. Her father continued pushing back on her decisions, questioning her judgment, building alliances against her. But Victoria had learned something important. She didn't need his approval anymore. She needed her own integrity, her own certainty that she was building something worth building. Edgebridge continued to grow, expanding into 15 states, then 20, then 30. The platform that had been failing when Victoria acquired it became a case study in mission-driven business. Other companies started following their model, proving that profitability and purpose weren't mutually exclusive. And somewhere in all of that, Victoria stopped trying to prove she could balance work and life. She just lived it, imperfectly, messily, honestly. 6 months after moving in, Mia had an asthma attack in the middle of the night. Victoria woke to Ethan shaking her, his face white with fear. "I need to take her to the ER. Can you—" "I'm coming with you." They sat in the emergency room at 3 a.m., Mia hooked up to monitors and breathing treatments, and Victoria held Ethan's hand while he tried not to fall apart. She'd never felt more helpless or more necessary in her life. "She's going to be okay," the doctor said eventually. "But you did the right thing bringing her in." On the drive home, with Mia sleeping in the back seat, Ethan reached over and squeezed Victoria's hand. "Thank you for being there. Where else would I be? I don't know. A year ago you might have stayed home, might have thought this was too much, too messy, too real. A year ago, I was an idiot." Ethan laughed, tired but genuine. "You were scared. There's a difference." "Am I still scared? Probably. But you show up anyway. That's what matters." A year after the board meeting, Victoria stood in front of another room full of people. But this time, it wasn't a boardroom. It was a small event space in Brooklyn, decorated with flowers that Mia had helped pick out. She was wearing a dress that wasn't a power suit, standing next to a man in a suit that still wasn't tailored but was clean and pressed and good enough. Mia stood between them, grinning so hard her face might split, holding a bouquet of flowers almost as big as she was. "We're gathered here today," the officiant began, and Victoria felt Ethan's hand tighten around hers. They'd kept it small, just close friends, a few colleagues. Sarah from the board, who'd become a genuine friend. Victoria's father hadn't come, which hurt less than she'd expected. Some relationships couldn't be fixed, and that was okay. The vows were simple. Victoria promised to show up, to be present, to love Ethan and Mia even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. Ethan promised to be patient with her learning curve, to call her out when she retreated into work, to remind her that she was more than her accomplishments. Mia, who'd insisted on being part of the ceremony, promised to teach Victoria about octopuses and to not complain too much when Victoria made her do homework. When the officiant pronounced them married, Mia cheered so loud that half the room jumped. Victoria kissed her husband, that would take getting used to, and felt Mia crash into both of them for a group hug. "We're a real family now," Mia announced to anyone listening. "We were a real family before," Victoria said, kneeling down to Mia's level. "The wedding just makes it official." "Good, because I already told everyone at school you're my mom." Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. "Is that okay? Me being your mom? Duh. You make terrible pancakes and you don't know anything about real science and you work too much. You're definitely a mom." It was the best compliment Victoria had ever received. The reception was loud and chaotic and nothing like the carefully controlled events Victoria usually attended. People danced badly, the cake was slightly lopsided, and someone's kid spilled juice on the rented tablecloth. It was perfect. Later, after most guests had left and Mia had fallen asleep on a couch in the corner, Victoria and Ethan stood outside, looking at the Brooklyn skyline across the river. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked. "About which part?" "All of it. Choosing this over the perfect CEO life. Marrying a guy who still can't make pancakes. Becoming a stepmother to a 7-year-old who's definitely going to drive you crazy." Victoria thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about her penthouse gathering dust on the market, about board meetings where her father still questioned her judgment, about mornings when she woke up exhausted from Mia's nightmare, or Ethan's snoring, or both. She thought about Tuesday afternoons that had turned into Wednesdays and Thursdays, and every day. About learning to make terrible dinosaur pancakes because Mia asked. About sitting in emergency rooms and helping with homework, and showing up for school events even when work was insane. She thought about what her life had been a year ago, successful and empty and so carefully controlled that there was no room for anything messy or real or human. No regrets? She said finally. Well, maybe one. What's that? That I didn't walk out of a meeting sooner. That I spent 30 years being perfect instead of being alive. Ethan pulled her close. You're making up for it now. Am I? I still work too much. I still struggle with letting go of control. I still have days when I want to run back to my old life because this one is so much harder. But you don't run. That's what matters. I don't run, Victoria agreed. Because where would I go? This is home now. You and Mia and the terrible pancakes and the chaos. This is what I've been looking for my whole life without knowing it. They stood there for a while longer, watching the city lights reflect off the water, before going back inside to wake Mia and head home to Queens. The next year brought changes Victoria couldn't have predicted. Hale Tech continued to thrive under her leadership, but she restructured her role, hired a president to handle day-to-day operations, delegated more to her executive team, freed herself to focus on strategy and vision instead of being consumed by every detail. Her father eventually resigned from the board, citing health concerns that Victoria suspected were more about pride than actual illness. They saw each other occasionally, stilted lunches where they talked about business because they'd never learned to talk about anything else. It wasn't the relationship Victoria had hoped for, but it was honest, and that mattered more than she'd expected. EduBridge became Hale Tech's flagship example of mission-driven business, spawning an entire division focused on education technology. Ethan stepped back from day-to-day management to focus on product development, the thing he actually loved. Sarah Chen took over as CEO of the education division, proving that the best leaders were the ones who built other leaders instead of hoarding power. Mia grew up, too fast according to Ethan, exactly the right speed according to Mia herself. She stayed fascinated by marine biology, adding aerospace engineering to her list of potential careers when she discovered women could be astronauts and scientists. Victoria helped with science fair projects and college prep and the navigation of middle school social dynamics, learning as she went that parenting was mostly about showing up consistently and pretending you knew what you were doing. 2 years after the wedding, Victoria stood in a hospital room, holding a tiny human who'd arrived 3 weeks early and screaming loud enough to prove her lungs worked fine despite the prematurity. Mia was pressed against her side, staring at her baby sister with a mixture of wonder and concern. "She's so small," Mia whispered. "You were smaller," Ethan said, looking exhausted and elated and terrified in equal measure. "Can I hold her?" Victoria carefully transferred the baby to Mia's arms, watching her older daughter, the words still felt miraculous, cradle her sister like she was made of glass. "Hi, Emma," Mia said softly. "I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you about octopuses and space and how to make Mom smile when she's working too much." Victoria felt Ethan's arm around her shoulders, felt the weight of this new life they'd created together, felt the terror and joy of having even more to lose now, more people to protect and care for and show up for. "We're going to screw this up sometimes," she said to Ethan. "Definitely. Probably a lot. She's going to grow up with a mom who works too much and gets distracted by business and doesn't always know the right thing to say. And a dad who makes terrible pancakes and worries too much and cries at kids' movies. And a sister who's going to teach her all the important things we'll forget." They stood there, watching Mia make promises to Emma about all the adventures they'd have. And Victoria thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, standing in a corner office, alone and successful, and convinced that was enough. Looking at a man who'd chosen his daughter over a deal and wondering what that felt like. Now she knew. It felt like this, terrifying and beautiful and so much harder than anything she'd ever done professionally. It felt like waking up at 3 a.m. to feed a baby while also trying to prepare for a board meeting. Like negotiating with an 8-year-old about homework while also negotiating million-dollar contracts. Like loving people so much it made her vulnerable in ways her father had taught her to avoid. It felt like being human instead of just being successful. And it was worth every sacrifice, every compromise, every moment of feeling like she was barely holding it together. 3 years later, Victoria gave a commencement speech at Stanford, the same one she'd done before, but this time she meant what she said. She talked about success and failure, about the difference between building an empire and building a life. She talked about walking out of meetings, about choosing people over profits, about the courage it takes to be vulnerable. The greatest success isn't what you build, she told the graduating class, thinking about Mia and Emma and Ethan waiting at home. It's who you choose to become. I spent 30 years becoming successful, and it left me empty. I spent the last 3 years becoming whole, and it's been the hardest, messiest, most rewarding work I've ever done. She paused, looked out at all those young faces full of ambition and hope, and the certainty that they could have it all. You can't have it all, she said honestly. Not all at once, not perfectly, not without sacrifice. But you can choose what matters. You can build something meaningful in your work and in your life. You can be excellent and also be present. It won't be balanced. Some days work will win, some days life will win, and most days you'll feel like you're failing at both. But if you keep showing up, if you keep choosing the people and purposes that matter, you'll build something better than success. You'll build a life worth living. The speech got mixed reviews. Some loved the honesty. Some thought it was too personal, too female, too focused on work-life balance instead of pure achievement. Victoria didn't care. She'd spent too many years caring what other people thought. That night, she came home to Queens. They'd bought a bigger house, one with room for 2 kids and an office for Victoria, and a garage Ethan converted into a workshop, and found chaos. Emma had painted herself blue with finger paints. Mia was crying because her science project wasn't working. Ethan was trying to cook dinner and failing spectacularly. "How was the speech?" he asked, looking harried. "Good. How's your day?" Emma ate paint. Mia's project is due tomorrow, and she just told me about it, and I burned whatever this was supposed to be. Victoria looked at the disaster zone that was her kitchen, at her blue daughter giggling in her high chair, at Mia's tears over a science project, at her husband covered in what looked like marinara sauce. 5 years ago, she would have run, would have retreated to her office or her perfect penthouse, or anywhere that felt controlled and clean. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves. "Okay, Emma to the bath. Mia, tell me about your project. And Ethan, step away from the stove before you burn down the house." They spent the next 3 hours in beautiful chaos, bathing Emma while explaining photosynthesis to Mia, ordering pizza because dinner was unsalvageable, building a project out of household items and determination. By the time both kids were in bed, Victoria and Ethan collapsed on the couch, exhausted. "This is nothing like I imagined my life would be," Victoria said. "Better or worse?" She thought about her old life, the silence, the control, the success that felt hollow. She thought about board meetings and quarterly reports and her father's disapproval. She thought about all the things she'd given up to be here. Then she thought about Mia calling her mom without hesitation, about Emma's first steps toward her, arms outstretched, about Ethan's hand in hers, steady and sure, about building something that mattered beyond profit margins and stock prices. "Better," she said. "Definitely better." Even when it's this messy, especially when it's this messy, because it's real, because it's ours, because I chose it instead of letting it choose me. They sat in comfortable silence, the house settling around them. Somewhere upstairs, Emma started crying. Another nightmare, probably. Ethan started to get up, but Victoria stopped him. "I've got her." She climbed the stairs to Emma's room, picked up her daughter, and rocked her back to sleep. Through the window, she could see the city in the distance. Manhattan, where her old life still existed in boardrooms and corner offices and penthouse views. But this was where she belonged. In this small room, holding this small human, building this small, messy, beautiful life. And if she'd LPA earned anything in the last 5 years, it was this. The greatest success wasn't what you built in the world. It was what you built within yourself. The courage to be vulnerable, the strength to choose love over fear, the wisdom to know that being whole mattered more than being perfect. She'd been powerful and lonely. Now she was human and loved. And that, Victoria thought, laying Emma back in her crib and watching her settle into sleep, was worth more than any empire. That was the thing her father never understood. The lesson she'd learned from a man who walked out of a meeting to save his daughter. The greatest victories weren't won in boardrooms. They were won in moments like this, choosing to show up, choosing to stay, choosing to build a life instead of just a legacy. Victoria went back downstairs, crawled into bed next to Ethan, and fell asleep in the messy, imperfect, completely beautiful life she'd chosen. And in the morning, she'd wake up and make terrible pancakes with Mia, because that's what mothers did. Even mothers who ran billion-dollar companies. Even mothers who'd spent 30 years learning the wrong lessons. Even mothers who were still figuring it out as they went. She'd show up, she'd try. She'd fail sometimes and succeed sometimes and keep going either way. Because that's what love looked like. Not perfect, not balanced, not easy, just real and enough.